This little get-together, I'm glad so many could come, was thanks to Mike Chickey and his wife Ann and his friend Randy. So I thank them for setting this up. They did this on very quick notice. They did this on very quick notice and contacted their group of friends and fellow colleagues. And I think it's very important because Los Angeles is a key nodal point on this planet. And Los Angeles deserves to have a better, more active 9/11 Truth Group, as you had before with We Are Change LA. They did incredible things. You know, they gave Joe Biden the copy of the 25-page paper on nanothermite in the World Trade Center, and they did wonderful things. And because LA is so a key part of our national media in this country and globally, excuse me, because it is such a nerve point, nerve center, it needs to have more active 9/11 truth. So I hope that you people who live here can find a way to make it happen, to re-energize it, to make it happen, because this deception that started with 9/11 isn't ending soon. When they said that this was, when Dick Cheney and those people talked about this being a war that will last for decades, they weren't joking. And they knew what they were talking about. And that's exactly what 9/11 is. It's 9/11, September 11th wasn't just a crime that was committed at one time and it's a historical event. No, 9/11 changed our world. And it changed our world as Americans most profoundly. It changed the nature of our country. It changed the relationship of how we as citizens respond to the state, how we relate to the state, how the state relates to us, and it ushered in the war on terror. This is a sign that Mike and Ann made. It says 9/11 truth ends the war. And this is a very good motto, a very good logo, a good slogan. And I'm using this for my tour. I've named my tour basically Solving 9/11, the book and the truth, ends the war. And what I mean by that is that, of course, this book isn't going to end the war by itself. But when you understand, when you read this book, and when you understand the deception, which it very clearly is, then then for you, the war is over. You are no longer deceived. You are free from that deception. And then you are able, you know, depending on how much you understand, when you read this book and you understand, then you're equipped to tell other people about it, and you are prepared to protect your family and your loved ones from being deceived by this. You know, it can cause in families, I know it doesn't, in some families, one person might be a 9/11 truther and the rest of the family thinks they're crazy. That happens in a lot of families. But, you know, you have to be patient and you have to help people understand that we have been deceived. Now, the thing is that now we're 13 years later. And as it says on this little placard, this poster over here, why 9/11 still matters 9 years later, cross out 13 years later, and how long it'll go on. Because what we have to understand about 9/11, looking back now in the last 13 years, is that September 11th is an act, let's put it this way. The murder of President Kennedy in 1963 was a real de facto coup d'etat, in which the government of this country was replaced with other people by force. 9/11, that coup d'etat has gone on. That coup d'etat has not been reversed. So since 1963, we've been living with this increasingly less and less democratic system, in which our candidates are chosen for us, and we're just given a choice of voting for Jeb Bush or Hillary Clinton or whoever they offer, John McCain, Barack Obama, what have you. September 11th, on the other hand, good evening, September 11th, on the other hand, was a policy coup. It was our national policy, our foreign policy, our defense policy was abruptly changed using terrorism as a method to create shock and awe and to make us amenable to the changes that were being imposed upon us. And these changes were planned in advance. Of course, the USA Patriot Act, the war in Afghanistan. The whole thing was planned and prepared for us ahead of time. So they just kick-started it with 9/11. This means, here, give him one of these too. Give him one of these too. This means that 9/11, September 11th, was a revolutionary act. It was a revolutionary act. It changed the way that our nation was, fundamentally, and it changed our foreign policy, it changed our defense policy in a revolutionary way. But it wasn't a revolution for the people. It wasn't a revolution that the people supported. It was a revolution by a very small group of people who wanted to change policy to suit their agenda. And so we have been, since then, we've been forced into a new way of living, a new way of thinking, the war on terror, and a new way of fighting and dying, fighting these wars of aggression in Afghanistan and Iraq. And so it's like, it's up to us. They're not going to change this. They're not, I sometimes think about, for 13 years, our government and our media have deceived us. That's a very, very big thing. So we're living in a democratic state. We're living in the nation that is looked up to by everybody in the free world, and everybody in the world. America is the place they look to bring the future, for guidance, for democracy. And here we are, a country that's been completely hijacked. And so if you're an American, you're sitting here and saying, well, our government is not democratic, our elections are not democratic, and our media is lying to us about the crime of the century for 13 years. So you say, well, geez, how are they ever going to back down? How are they ever going to come down from that tree? The media is up there telling us all this agenda-driven stuff. They're playing up the war on terror agenda day after day, like if you saw what the events in Paris the other day, last week. The CNN had Jake Tapper and those people 24/7 talking about how this latest terrorism event in France was going to change the way Europe lives and the way Europe is going to operate, and usher in new anti-Semitic laws and all of this. It's like, so here's Jake Tapper, the guy who hates 9/11 truth, who attacks 9/11 truth viciously, and yet here he is giving a new agenda for the latest dose of false flag terrorism. And 9/11 was an act of false flag terrorism. That is, it was a crime that was done for the purpose of deceiving. We are the primary targets of the acts of 9/11. It is us, the American people, who are the people who are supposed to be deceived. We're the ones who are supposed to be shocked and deceived into this new reality that we're in now. And so you say, well, 9/11 Truth comes out more and more every day. Architects and engineers from 9/11 Truth, you've gotten an envelope with some material from them, has completely proven, I think it's 2,200 architects and engineers belong to this group, and they have proven that the official version of what happened on 9/11 cannot possibly be true. Yet we have a media and a government who continue to base policy and base their actions on the lies of 9/11. Well, that's not sustainable. So, our ship of state, if you take the United States as a ship of state, and here it is on even keel, when 9/11 happened, it was thrust like sideways, And it's for us to turn the ship back and make it aright, to get the ship back on a level footing. Because our nation has been hijacked. So we're living in a situation where our government has given itself great powers. We have lost a lot of liberties, a lot of freedoms, and they have plundered the wealth of this nation. Plundered. The defense budget in 2001 was $300 billion a year. Roughly $1,000 for every man, woman, and child in the country. After 9/11, it doubled. It didn't go up by half. It doubled automatically. It went to 600. And now it's closer to 800 or 900 billion a year. So it's gone from $1,000 for every man, woman, and child in the country to $2,000. Now it's close to $3,000 a year. So you wonder why there's no money to fix the schools or the roads or the bridges, because we have this Zionist war agenda imposed on us. And that's our reality. So it's for us to undeceive ourselves, to inform ourselves about how we've been deceived, and tend to spread the word and organize as much as we can, because this is not something that we have to take lightly. This we have to take very seriously. You know, we can't be lulled into thinking that, oh, everything's going to be okay. You know, we're still living in a normal nation. It'll be all right. It won't be all right. This 9/11 was an act that was done to change America completely. It was meant to change our nation and to change us as people and to change our foreign policy for a long, long time. And if we don't turn it around, it will not get turned around. You can be sure that the media is not going to turn it around. Obviously, the people, the puppets in government are not going to turn it around. Academics aren't going to turn it around. They're quaking in their boots. Churches aren't going to do anything. I wrote a letter to the Pope. I told the Pope, you should just go out there in St. Peter's one Sunday morning, and say, people, we have been deceived about what happened on 9/11. Full stop. That's all he has to say. He doesn't have to go pointing fingers, but just that we have been deceived. Because when people realize we've been deceived, then they can go on to the next step, which is why the architects and engineers material that I gave you in this little envelope is so important. Any of you who, I think most of you probably already know a great deal, so it's just material that clarifies for you that the official version cannot possibly be correct. Okay, so once we've gotten to that point, A&E for 9/11 Truth has done a great service to this nation by using their expertise and informing people that the official version of what happened on 9/11 is not true. Okay, where do we go from there? The next question is, so who did it then? If Osama bin Laden and his gang of 19 thieves didn't do it, who did? And as we know from the architects and engineers from 9/11 Truth, that these nanothermite was found, super thermite was found in the dust of the destroyed towers. Well, how did that get there? Obviously, Osama bin Laden didn't put it in there. The 19 Arabs didn't get in there. They didn't have access to that kind of sophisticated military-grade technology, nanotechnology, making thermite at a nano level. This required a great deal of technological know-how and expertise. So if they didn't do it, who did it? That's where my book fills this gap, because there's a lot of material out there about 9/11, what did happen, what didn't happen, but who did it is where I have excelled, because I was an investigative journalist when 9/11 happened. I was passing through New York City with my family on the morning of 9/11, early in the morning. And because I was an investigative journalist, this fell right into my lap. And it also fell into my kind of specialty, which is government cover-ups. I had covered other stories like the shooting down of Flight 800, TW8, Flight 800 off the coast of New York, which was an obvious cover-up by the U.S. government. The sinking of the Estonia ship in the Baltic Sea in 1994, cover-up by the government of Sweden. And there's a whole slew of these kinds of things. But 9/11 was egregious, was over the top, was far in excess of anything that had happened before. So I turned my attention to it, and also because my specialty is the Middle East, my specialty is Israel and Palestine, exactly. This fit right into the kind of stuff that I had been studying for years. And what I found, from day one, was that there were very clear indications that the state of Israel had prior knowledge. No less than prior knowledge. There's the 5 dancing Israelis, 2 of whom were Mossad agents, who then went back to Israel after they had been arrested by New Jersey police. And they told, on the Yair Lapid show in Israel, they said in plain Hebrew that our purpose was to document the event. And then there was also the Odigo messages, where 4,000 Israelis who were expected to have been in the area of the Pentagon or the World Trade Center on 9/11 miraculously were not there. And Odigo messaging system, which is an Israeli texting system that uses all platforms, BlackBerry, pager, internet, what have you, where a message was sent out on this Israeli message system in Hebrew, telling people that there would be a terrible catastrophe at the World Trade Center, and that this warning was sent out 2 or 3 hours before the event and was precise to the minute. And that's from the owner of the company, the vice president of the company, Alex Diamandis, told that to the media, that in Israel, that the messages were received by employees of Odigo in Israel, and that the message was precise to the minute. So that said that at 8:45 there would be an attack at the World Trade Center. You better not be there. So based on those two little bits of information, those two stories that were published in the United States, in the weeks after 9/11, it was very clear that the Israelis had prior knowledge. And when the Israeli state, the Israeli government, Odigo, when they have prior knowledge of something like 9/11, that means complicity. Because if you know something's going to happen, and you have several hours in advance knowledge, and you don't warn the New York police and the New York mayor's office and the New York Fire Department, then you're guilty, you're complicit. You're complicit in the deaths of those 3,000 people. Because any normal person with such knowledge, if they got such knowledge, would have called 9/11 right away and said there's going to be something terrible happening in the World Trade Center in 2 hours. Close the place down. That wasn't done. That would have saved 3,000 lives.
Were the Mossad agents normal people? They knew.
Okay, we'll take questions afterward, but I'll answer your question right now just for that. That's because, yes, there were 5 people that were seen. They're called the 5 Dancing Israelis. They were seen in Jersey City or just across the river from Manhattan, and they had been filming and videotaping and high-fiving. They had been clicking their lighters and things like that with the burning towers in the background. They were, videotaping and photographing themselves, and they were clicking their lighters and smiling and high-fiving to celebrate what was happening behind them, which was an American Holocaust, where 3,000 people were literally being cooked alive. And those 5 men, 2 of them were the Kurtzberg brothers, Sivan and I forgot his other brother's name, but these two Kurtzberg brothers were known agents of Israeli intelligence, and that fact was known to law enforcement in the United States. So when these 2 men were arrested by the New Jersey police, as soon as they put their name into the computer, they knew right away from the list that these guys are Israeli intelligence. The other 3 were working for them, and the 5 together were working for a Mossad front company in Weehawken, New Jersey called Urban Moving Systems, which was a fake moving company.
Were they all agents?
They were all agents. And the president of that company was a man named Dominic Suter, who the FBI had checked him out already on September 11th or September 12th. And they had done a preliminary check. They knew that he was a suspect. But then he was able to leave the country. He was able to flee the country before the second interview. So it's like, this man was allowed to get back to Israel.
Do we have extradition with Israel?
No, Israel does not extradite people, Israelis. That's part of the purpose of Israel existence, is that it provides safe haven for Zionist criminals, so they can go there and they can be safe. Okay. Now I guess having said all that as a way of introduction, I think it's a good time to you can ask some questions. Because the questions that you have, he has opened up the new channels of discussion, and I would like to do that, so that if anybody has any questions at all, please. Yes. Yes.
I read a book from a guy that worked for Voltaire, .org, whatever.
Yes.
Theory. Anyway, he says that something was burning at the White House in 9/11. Is that true at all? That there was a coup going on there physically?
Oh, I know you're talking about VoltaireNet.org, I think, Terry Masson.
Yeah.
No, I know him, and I don't know if anything was burning at the White House. I have not heard that. I've read his book. I've read his books about 9/11, and I also read what he wrote about the most recent attacks in Paris. And because he's French and because he's living in Damascus, he has good information. But he at the very end of this article about the most recent Charlie Hebdo attack, at the very last sentence, he pins it on Washington, D.C. He says, this is done by Washington, D.C. without a stitch of proof. And I'm afraid that's his kind of anti-Americanness speaking, louder than his logic allows. Because, I have not written about Charlie Hebdo attack, but I can tell you that the people who profited the most from the Charlie Hebdo attack are, again, Netanyahu and the Israelis. Netanyahu, was not supposed to be in that march. That little march where they show these world leaders or these European leaders walking in unison, as you know, is just a very small group of 50 people. They were not the head of the march at all. That was on a side street. There was no march there. They were on a side street. But Netanyahu wasn't supposed to be in that little picture, and he was then delegated to the second row, but he squeezed himself up to be in the front row, because he's running for office. And if you watch CNN on the days after Paris thing, when they had Netanyahu went to the Grand Synagogue of Paris, he walked in like he was a rock star. He walked into the synagogue waving, here I am, savior of the Jewish people. And it's like, whoa, it's like, he's running for office, of course, in Israel. He's, and so he's trying to win points back home by putting up this big image of being a world leader. But Netanyahu, you have to understand, this war on terror construct, I call it a construct.
Hey, Chris,
Yeah.
I just add that Francois Hollande,
Yeah.
he asked him not to attend.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Exactly. He was not allowed. He was not supposed to attend. He was not supposed to be part of the march, but he still muscled his way in there in order to get that face up there. But what I was going to say about Netanyahu is that this man is a psychopath. He is a psychopath. He gets up there at the United Nations, United Nations. I think I saw him do that, and he talks about this little shard of pottery that was found buried in Jerusalem someplace. Some archaeologists found it, and he said written on that shard was Netanyahu. He said that's my name. But Netanyahu's father was Ben-Zion Milakovsky from Warsaw, Poland. So where does the Netanyahu come from? I mean, that's very disingenuous to pretend that you are something authentic from Jerusalem when you're actually from Warsaw, Poland.
From a long line of yahoos.
Yeah. That's a good one. But wait, I want to finish this one thought here because before I go to the next question. Netanyahu in 1979, they had the first conference of the Netanyahu Institute, also called the Yonatan Institute, named after his brother who was killed in Entebbe. And the Yonatan Institute, or the Netanyahu Institute, had its first big conference in Jerusalem in 1979. George Herbert Walker Bush was there. He spoke there. He was then, I guess, he was still CIA? He was in 79. He was a candidate for office as the vice presidential candidate with Ronald Reagan. And he went there and he gave a speech even. But this conference is, not very many people know about this conference, but in this conference they laid out the groundwork, the foundation, that the Western nations, the United States, should have to engage in a war on terror and fight Israel's enemies basically for them. That American forces would have to be deployed in the Middle East and on a permanent basis. And they tried to do it in 1982. If you remember, in 1982, when the Israelis went up to Beirut, then there's no way they could hold that southern Lebanon territory by themselves, so they invited the French and the Italians and the Americans to do it for them. And Reagan sent some troops, a couple thousand troops, of which 171 were murdered in one day.
220 something.
Yeah.
The Marines.
Yeah. And 220. And then he pulled them offshore. But you see, that was the beginning when the Begin government wanted to get the United States to have bases in South Lebanon so that they would hold the line. And they would create this buffer zone for Israel, because Israel needs to have some sort of buffer zone.
A project for a greater Israel.
Exactly. And so they tried to get the United States then, and Reagan pulled them out. But 9/11 was what that was all about. 9/11 was to kickstart that war on terror, which was an Israeli construct from the 1970s. And this whole thing got its start ideologically back then, in the 1970s, when the Likud party came to power in Israel. That's when Menachem Begin and Yitzhak Shamir, known terrorists, known exploders, known bombers, known murderers, took power in Israel. And I was living in Israel at the time. I remember my girlfriend, who was a Labor Party kibbutznik from the Labor Party, they were very distressed. They were very distressed that these Likudniks had taken power because they said, this is the end of Israel. The terrorists have taken over. That's how they saw them. And that's what happened. But in this country, when I came back to this country when I was like 21, I saw that the discourse, the level of discourse about the state of Israel was woefully inadequate and distorted. So Americans were getting a very rosy picture about Israel when there was not a glimmer of hope for what Israel had become. And those terrorists who came to power in the 1970s, like in 1975, 76, when Begin came to power, they then began using terrorism, which is their main tool of operation. They began using that on a global scale. And so that these kinds of events like 9/11, 9/11 being a false flag terrorism attack, Charlie Hebdo is probably also a false flag terrorism attack. The bombings in Baghdad are false flag terror attacks. Probably the bombings of those apartment buildings in Moscow was probably false flag terror attack. It is the new norm. It is the new norm. It is the way things are done, because it's meant to get a response from us that will fit into the global agenda. So they want us to be conditioned so that we will accept what they tell us on TV, and then we will go along with the plan. Next question. Let's take you had your hand up.
I have two.
Yes.
One, when the guys were picked up by, I think, the New Jersey police on the George Washington Bridge, they said, we're not your problem.
Yeah.
The Israelis and Palestinians are your problem.
Yeah.
That's one.
Yeah.
Obviously, Netanyahu saying this is good for Israel.
Yes.
That's two. The three, the whole thing with Amy Goodman and General Westmoreland, when he did that video, and I posted this everywhere, and it doesn't seem to gain any feet. But when he said that he went to the Joint Chiefs of Staff at the Pentagon the second week after 9/11 and was sitting there, wanted to just visit with some people from back in the day.
Yeah.
And the guy handed him the memo and said, the guy says, we're going into Iraq.
That's Wesley Clark. Wesley Clark.
Why are we going into Iraq? And he said, I don't know.
Right.
And then he said, we're going into 7 countries in the next 5 years.
Right.
Somalia, Iraq, Iran, Libya,
Right.
et cetera, and this is Greater Israel.
Right.
So it's almost like the marching orders were coming down and got slipped out to us,
Yeah.
and it got
This is
put
the
on.
new American agenda, new American century
And here
agenda.
they laid
Yeah.
out in a memo that he's on tape talking about listing the 7 countries in 5 years. We haven't quite made it, obviously. 5 years went by and we didn't quite make the agenda. But it says, and he said it finally with Iran.
Right.
Well, obviously, we've got Netanyahu now coming, and Boehner inviting him to the joint, session of Congress, and Obama saying he's not going to meet with him because there's an election and this whole brouhaha. But it's like, I can't believe what's going on here. Just as like, is Netanyahu president of the United States, or is Obama?
Right. Right.
Neocons, the PNACers, are the action agents in the U.S.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and
Well, the thing.
Because you're jumping in with the Republicans too, by the way.
But
You
this
notice
memo
that
from the
big time,
Pentagon,
indeed.
this is like from the high up saying this is where we're going.
Yeah.
This is
Well-
Israel's agenda, not ours, Israel's.
Well, the thing is that like at the Pentagon, that policy that you're talking about, when Wesley Clark talks about that,
I'm
he was very honest. Wesley Clark. He's actually part Jewish himself. He's from Arkansas, and he was saying what the policy as it was coming down to them. Now, where does the policy come from? It comes from the policy board of the Pentagon, which is a bunch of unelected people like Wolfowitz and Richard Pearl, all Zionists, who are the people in between. That's what Guilt by Association Jeff Gates talks about a lot, is the people in between. The Zionists make themselves the people in between, like between the White House, the Pentagon, and the people. You always have these Zionists putting the Zionist spin on it. So the policies that the Pentagon winds up putting into effect are Zionist policies that come down to them from this policy board, which is headed by people like Wolfowitz and the neocons, right? The State Department is the same way. The people who actually apply the policy on the ground, for example in Kiev, was Victoria Nuland. Victoria Nuland Kagan. She's the wife of Robert Kagan, the guy who brought us the surge in Iraq and brought us the war in Iraq. The Kagan,
the PNAC?
yeah, the Kagan family were the PNAC people. Donald Kagan, the cross-eyed Lithuanian Jew, and his 2 sons, Frederick and Robert, they were like the co-founders of the Project for a New American Century. And they're the ones who came up with that paper that called for a new American Pearl Harbor, a new Pearl Harbor that would facilitate this gigantic plan for America to occupy Iraq again, whether Saddam Hussein was there or not. It says that in the document.
The catalyzing event.
Yeah, it's a project for rebuilding America's defenses. That paper came out in the spring of 2000, I think. And so these people, if you remember the debates of 2000, the journalists who were paying attention were asking George Bush, what is your position on regime change? Because they knew that would be coming. If he became president, that would be coming. But they said that whether Saddam Hussein is in power or not in Baghdad is irrelevant. America still has to occupy Iraq. And so we've occupied Iraq, and we've built a base in the green zone that is like half the size of Los Angeles. It's huge, you see? So we're there for the long term. This is part of a long-term policy. That's what I'm saying is that it's not like 9/11 happened, we put out the fires, we move on. No, there's no moving on from there, because that was meant to change us, our nation, and our policy for the long term. And so our policy has been guided by criminal psychopaths ever since.
And that begs the question, what next?
Yeah, what do we do?
That's it. What next? What next? Well, the first thing is that we have to demand from our politicians and from our media that they address 9/11 truth. It's not an option to pretend that 9/11, the official version, is in any way correct. And see, that's why we have been in a revolutionary state in this country. I would say at least since 9/11, but certainly since 2009, when we discovered the nanothermite in the dust. Because when the nanothermite was discovered, the superthermite was discovered in the dust of the World Trade Center. This explosive, this extremely sophisticated explosive, when that was found in the dust, that meant that the official version was dead as a doornail. And there was no way that the official version could any longer be accepted as being a plausible explanation for what happened.
Well, how come 6 billion still die?
6 billion people? Well, they don't. They don't.
They just don't know they don't?
They don't. You see, here you're a nucleus of a small group, but there's a lot of people who would be here if they knew about it, and then there's a lot of people who would be here if they had the courage to embrace 9/11 truth as you have. You see, you're a remarkable group of individuals. You're people who have already crossed several thresholds that most Americans haven't even addressed. You've crossed the threshold. You understand that our government is not what it's supposed to be. You understand that our media is lying to us. You understand a lot of things that the average American hasn't even thought about deeply, because it's a very uncomfortable thing to think about. If you're still living in the day-to-day reality, think we're living in a normal country with a normal democracy, with a normal free press, you're totally deceived. But getting away from that comfort zone means going through some very uncomfortable phases, and that's difficult. So what we have to do is, when we understand 9/11 deception, the facts, just the facts, like what I present in this book, I'm just reading it again. I'm almost done. I've only got like 50 pages left, just to see again what I've said, and it's amazing. I find so much information in my own research, because I did a lot of research, I checked the facts, I put the facts out there. And I always understated it. I always understated my arguments, thinking that I gave the reader a lot of credit for figuring it out themselves. But the facts in these books stand for themselves. These books will stand the test of time, because the facts don't lie. The data doesn't lie. And when you read all the data that's put together in these books, then you see that at every point of inquiry, at every nodal point in the 9/11 saga, the key person who made an executive decision to maintain the deception was a Zionist Jew, or an agent of Israel, or an Israeli himself. The most important thing is that many people in this country rest assured, thinking that the 9/11 crime was investigated, thoroughly investigated, reports were written, and that the crime was figured out. That's what the media tells them. Wrong, wrong, wrong. 9/11 was a crime in which 3,000 people were killed, in which there was no criminal investigation. There was no criminal investigation. So when CNN came out to talk to me, what?
And the evidence destroyed.
That's it. You see, you cannot have a criminal investigation without examining the evidence. And the person who was supposed to investigate 9/11 was Michael Chertoff. Because we then had the Assistant Attorney General, he was Assistant Attorney General in charge of the criminal division of the Department of Justice. His boss was John Ashcroft, the sort of like born-again Christian who lost a political race to a dead man. He lost to Mel Carnahan in Missouri. And this guy, you know, John Ashcroft could get up there and talk about religion like an old time, preacher. But when it came to 9/11, he allowed Michael Chertoff to basically push the whole thing under the rug. And we're talking about a lot of evidence. You know, the mountain of steel, all that was left of the World Trade Center was steel and dust. And you have to remember that the holes, the basement of the World Trade Center was 7 stories deep. So all that steel is piled up inside that seven stories there, and then there's another 5 stories up above. So you have a whole mountain of steel they had to get rid of. And thanks to their Israeli friends, they found a way to get rid of that steel secretly, discreetly, quickly. And they took the steel to New Jersey, cut it up 24/7 into pieces 50 inches or shorter, 5 feet or shorter it was, and mixed it with other steel and sent it to China. And they were doing this at a time when the price of scrap steel was the lowest it had been in 50 years.
Didn't they make a watercraft carrier, a ship out of that steel?
Well, like you said, they took some pieces and did things like that. You know, they took maybe a little piece, but the criminal evidence from the scene was treated like garbage, is what I'm saying. It was treated, if you remember what they said is that let's get Wall Street back in action. Let's get the country back on its feet. Let's just clean up this mess and get on with life. Go spending, go shopping. You know, see? It's like, whoa, wait a minute. There's 3,000 souls inside this mess here. Let's find out what made those towers fall first. But there was no interest in that. They told us they had a prepared narrative. They told us who did it, how they did it, end of story. Take it, America. Let's run with it. It means we'll go to war in Iraq, Afghanistan, right? That's what it did. Yes, your question.
Also, something that it's in our face, the things that they do, that I'm an artist, it's so in your face, and also I did civil engineering. But the picture that you see that they utilize, you see pieces of steel standing up, you know that well-known picture? And the steel is at a 45-degree angle. That is in your face.
Mm-hmm.
That is exactly how those explosives were cut, because whenever you do a brain-controlled demolition, it's cut so that it slides and it goes ping, 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 ping. When we would do a building, and then where do you want it to come down? Down here, out there, where? And then it starts to come and it slides, and I said, this is in your face.
Absolutely.
And people would look at me and say, you're so cynical. And I thought, what's wrong with you?
Right.
I know, for thinking.
Yes, question?
Okay, so this is kind of along the lines of what she's saying as well. I'm a ceramicist, and I can tell you, certainly, you may not melt steel in this way. If that were the case, then everyone's barbecue would be enough.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
Like, you just can't. I mean, I have kilns, you can't do it, it can't be done.
Stove would melt.
So and then it feels to me like they always rely on what people don't know. Like, for example, the no-go zones in Paris, where I lived for 9 years.
Right.
It's like, they're really nice neighborhoods. Okay, so I just think it's like they just prey on the thickness and how much people don't know. So I want to know about the psychology, really.
Well, I think that
it's ridiculous.
From watching the, I was on the road, so I was able to watch the CNN coverage of the Paris Charlie Hebdo thing on the weekend when Netanyahu came to the synagogue and everything. And I saw how CNN does it. They create a very, very simple narrative that they present than 24/7. And they just repeat it, repeat it, repeat it. And they add very little, there's very little actual information they present. They just present the narrative, what you're supposed to take away. And, you know, basically you're supposed to take away that these Muslims are doing this, and they're attacking, from the Charlie Hebdo attack, they're attacking freedom of speech, and they attacked a kosher deli. Therefore, freedom of speech and our liberties and Jewishness are the same. You see? And now you see even Murdoch is saying, I think Rupert Murdoch was saying just in an opinion piece yesterday, that Israel is basically the beacon of hope for the whole Western world. Like Israel is the morality of the Western world, and that's why we have to protect Israel, because Israel is like the canary in the coal mine. When Israel stops singing, we're all toast. And it's so ridiculous. I mean, it's so ridiculous. But you have to understand that people like Rupert Murdoch are right in the middle of the architectural level. One thing about this 9/11 saga, or event like 9/11, you have to understand, is that I got this from Andreas von Bülow, who used to be a parliamentarian in Germany, who oversaw the German intelligence budgets. And he told me that an operation like 9/11 has basically 3 levels of operation. There's the architectural level, the management level, and the working level. The 19 Arabs would be considered the working level. That's part of the deception. So you think that they're the bad guys. The architectural level, the top echelon, he says you very seldom get them, because they're the ones who have planned the event to change public opinion. You see, so 9/11 was meant to change how Americans see the Middle East, how we see people from the Middle East, how we view Palestine, how we view the whole Middle Eastern complex. You know, and basically that we should see Middle Easterners as dangerous, threatening, and anti-democratic. That's what we're supposed to think. And so then we're supposed to take away from this event. You see right away, George Bush is up there saying, they attacked us because they hate our freedoms. They hate our freedoms. Therefore, they're the ones who are attacking our freedoms. Therefore, we have to fight them. And that is this same narrative that's gone on till today. And so what happened in Paris just the other day is just like throwing another log on the fire.
Yeah, I was going to say.
It's like you have this fire that was created by 9/11. It burned down a little bit. Christopher Bollyn's making a lot of waves. Throw another log on the fire. And so that just kindle it up again. It's getting slow in Australia. Do something over in Australia. Do something in Europe. Do something here. And it's like they're doing it. Question.
Yes, Chris, just recently your females in the room were involved in an American resistance movement against Israel, which was called Block the Boat. This was against the Israeli-owned shipping line, which is called Zim Shipping. Amongst the things that this company is bringing back to the United States includes paramilitary equipment, including bullets that were used against victims in Ferguson, Missouri. Would you, for some people that are not familiar with Zim Shipping lines and their connection to 9/11, would you elaborate on that connection, please?
Sure. Zim Shipping is a very big Israeli company. It's ZIM, and it stands for Zim American Navigation. It is Israel's main shipping company. So it's a big part of Zionist logistics. And this company had a whole floor, I think, at the World Trade Center in the North Tower or South Tower. And their contract wasn't up, their lease wasn't up, but they vacated that property a week or 10 days before 9/11. Shortly before 9/11, they vacated and moved and relocated down in Norfolk, Virginia. And now Zim is a very important company because Zim is one of those Israeli companies like Israeli Corporation, which is Israel Corporation, which was formerly owned by Shaul Eisenberg. And Shaul Eisenberg is a very, very high-level Israeli operative in China. He's dead now. But just to give you an example of how high-level he is, he was married to a Japanese woman. He owned Zim Corporation. He owned Israel Corporation. He owned these corporations. And he actually, in 1985, tried to get the security contract for the World Trade Center with a little company that he had called Atwell Security. And a couple high-level Mossad guys, like Zvi Malkin and Avraham Shalom Ben-Dor, they were his local lieutenants in New York who were negotiating with the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey to get the security contract for Atwell Security, for the World Trade Center, for the whole Port Authority. Includes underground and the subway and the ports and the airports, what have you. Had that contract gone through, 9/11 would have happened 10 years earlier. 9/11 would have probably happened in 1990. See, because that was one of the pieces of the puzzle that had to be done. What happened is that somebody at the Port Authority discovered that Shalom Ben-Dor was a convicted murderer in Israel. He was the former head of the Shin Bet, and he had given the order to smash a couple Palestinian skulls on a bus in 1984 when they were caught, when they were captured having commanded a bus. And rather than arrest them or take them to jail or anything like that, put them on trial, he just said smash their skulls. So their skulls were smashed. And Israel is actually kind of a democratic place in some ways, if you're Jewish. And there was an investigation, and he was found guilty of this, and he was removed from his position. And then he went to New York and started working with his other Mossad buddies and trying to get the contract for the Port Authority. But when the guy at the Port Authority discovered this Shalom Ben-Dor is really the guy that committed that murder, they tore up the contract. And that delayed 9/11. So that meant that these Mossad guys had to find another way to get the security contract. That was very important. They wound up getting it through Maurice Greenberg and Jules Kroll. But now this fellow I was talking about, Shaul Eisenberg, who owned Zim Shipping before, who owned Israel Corporation, during World War II, he was working with the Imperial Army of Japan against the Americans. And in the Imperial Army of Japan was training Israeli soldiers, would-be Israeli soldiers. They were training Jewish kids from Russia who had come to Japan, and they were called the Beitar. Beitar is like the black shirts would be. They were the youth party of the Likud, what became the Likud. These were the hard-line Zionists, and they were being taught the skills of terrorism in Japan during World War II. And then after World War II, they went to Palestine and exercised what the Japanese had taught them on the Palestinian people. And you know that in 1948, about 400 Palestinian 400 Palestinian villages and towns were obliterated. They were obliterated. So when you go to, if you go to Israel, if you go to a kibbutz, for example, like I used to live on kibbutz Afakim in the Jordan Valley, if you just go down to the Jordan River and up on the little bluff there, you find the remains of a village. You find the remains of houses and village and road. It no longer exists because those people were all forcibly expelled and an Israeli settlement was put there. Or it was just like they were just expelled. And so that these places don't even exist on the map anymore. You see? But that is the crime that this is all part of. It's amazing that such a small country like Israel, if you go to Yahoo, for example, Yahoo News, and every other story is about Israel. But this is a country, the size of Lithuania, with a population about 8 million people, they say.
Size of New Jersey.
It's small. And yet it is like a constant fixture in our news. Every day we're told what we're told is we're given a complete rose-colored vision. We're looking at Israel with rose-colored goggles because they want us to think that Zionism is democratic, that we have something in common with Israel, that we have a shared fate, and that therefore it is our obligation to support this state. In Germany, Frau Merkel, the Prime Minister of Israel, the Chancellor of Germany, she has said, even that, she said, the duty of Germany is to protect Israel. That's our raison d'être. That's our reason for existing, is to protect Israel. Question, sir.
Now, I'd like to ask, why does Israel have this much power? Why, quote, the Zionists have this much power that could influence the White House, that could change 9/11? I mean, is it a Jewish issue? Is it I'm confused here.
Good question. That's a very good question.
Can I just interject something? Just wanted to say that the Rothschilds own Reuters and the Associated Press.
Okay, that's exactly. I'll get into that exactly because your question is very good. So you say to yourself, that's what I was asking for years too. How is it that little Israel could have such clout? one thing you have to remember is that on 9/11, for example, before the buildings collapsed, they've been hit by the planes, but before they collapsed, or shortly after they collapsed, but I think even before they collapsed, Ehud Barak was on BBC World Television giving his explanation for who was behind this. Now that's very important. In a false flag terror attack, they have to get their explanation out very quickly. They don't want you to think, to ponder, to ask any questions. You get hit by the shock and awe, and then they give you a second to think about it, and then they tell you what happened. And that's what Ehud Barak did. Ehud Barak is the former commander of the Sayeret Matkal, along with Netanyahu. Netanyahu was one of his soldiers, both brothers, Jonathan and Bibi. Sayeret Matkal is elite commando force that serves directly under the chief of staff of the Israeli military. Okay, so it's like a secret or a self-contained commando force that serves the chief of staff. Okay, now Ehud Barak is on BBC TV telling the entire English-speaking world that he said that we know who's behind this. It's Osama bin Laden, that we know where Osama bin Laden is hiding, and it is time for America to lead the world in a concrete war on terrorism. Okay, so we know that this concrete war on terrorism is an Israeli construct. But as you say, wait a minute, Israel's a little country with very little, they have a lot of some stuff, but they're very, very limited. How can they be wagging the dog? How can they be so powerful they wag the dog? Who's helping them wag the dog? Well, I tell you, there is a big guy with big hands who's got the tail of that dog who's wagging against the wall. And that is the Rothschilds. It's not just the Rothschilds, it is Zionism International. And Zionism International is Los Angeles, California. It's one of the big cities. New York, Paris, Chicago, London, City of London belongs to them. The City of London belongs to them. It's a private city. You know, the City of London is actually a private enterprise in the middle of London, owned by these people.
Like Washington, D.C. and like the Vatican.
Right. And now, so you say, well, wait. Now, these Rothschilds, how could they be so powerful? Well, the Rothschilds, of course, have a lot of money. And the Rothschilds basically built the state of Israel. Israel was nothing, and it was Palestine. And then, of course, there was the Balfour Declaration in 1917 that in order to get the United States into the war, the First World War, they promised Lord Rothschild, the letter was made out to Lord Rothschild.
Signed the Balfour Agreement.
It was made out to him.
Yes.
It was made out to him. Dear Lord Rothschild. And Lord Rothschild is the titular head of British Jewry. So the Jewish community of Britain is headed by Lord Rothschild. So
His side of the deal was to get the U.S. in the war.
Yes.
That is not a small fact.
No.
in
Yes.
itself.
Yes. And so they promised this land of Palestine for a Jewish homeland for the Jewish people. And then, of course, the Rothschilds funded the first 30 settlements in Israel. Places like Rishon LeZion, the first in Zion, Rishon LeZion, where Ben Gurion was a picker of the grapes. And they said, Ben Gurion, I think you'll be the prime minister of Israel. And Ben Gurion came from Rishon LeZion. He was working in the vineyard there, and they made him the prime minister. And now the Rothschilds, they have great power. They own the media. They're on the executive board of BBC. And they create media moguls like Rupert Murdoch. Rupert Murdoch, I've met him before. He was a little guy in Australia, little newspaper. He doesn't tell you his mother was an Orthodox Jew, Mrs. Green, and he uses the Murdoch name. He wants you to think that he's a good Scotsman, right? But he's more loyal to his Jewish side. And so he's very loyal to the state of Israel. And what happened is that the Rothschilds create big media moguls like Rothschild, like Mr. Murdoch. They fund him, they see if he's going to work out. He works out, fund him more, and he becomes this billionaire who comes to America and buys up media properties like they're dandelions. Wait a minute, where's the money come from? Same question you could ask Alex Jones. Where's the money come from? Same you can ask, I know the media mogul of a little country called Estonia. where'd the money come from, Hans? Where'd you get the money to buy all these properties? That's how they do it. They create the person who then becomes the media mogul. Like in the case of the Murdoch family, it probably won't last very long because the Murdoch boys are not Jewish. Their mother was an Estonian. So it's like when Rupert passes the scene, it will probably pass on to somebody else. But that's the thing, is that these Rothschilds, because of their power in the central banking, in their power over the US dollar, because of their power over the Western world, it's not been forever. It's only been a couple hundred years. They really got started like in the 1770s. They were instrumental in the American Revolution. You remember that the American Revolution was largely fought by German soldiers called Hessians, mercenaries. And some of my relatives were German Hessians who came to fight the Revolutionary War. And they...
From the British.
Well, they were fighting on both sides, actually. When George Washington was going across the river to Trenton, and that famous painting, in that battle, the Battle of Trenton, it was mostly Hessians fighting Hessians. They were the British Hessians and the Americans, they were fighting each other. So but the Rothschilds were the ones who had control over the Count of Hesse. And so that's where they're from. They're from that's Frankfurt. They're from that part of the world. And they got into this business of funding wars and funding governments and then controlling those governments. And that's the situation we're in today. That's the situation we're in Britain, in Canada, Australia, and the United States. And so it's this little financial power, which is usually 2 or 3 steps behind. They're detached. So I have one article in this book that deals with this, because there are Rothschild fingerprints on 9/11, but you have to look very carefully. And I think it's on page 160. I have an article here which goes in great detail about this group of high-level men in Washington, D.C. who are working for the Rothschilds.
Let me ask you just one more question to follow up on this.
Okay.
It's very hard to not leave this room not feeling that really Jews are scoundrels, if I may say so, only because they are made into pretty much some dark creatures here. And it's difficult because that's my I'm wondering how we can feel our perception.
Yeah, that's a good question. Because it's not that Jews are scoundrels. Some Jews are scoundrels.
There's different forms of Judaics.
Yeah.
There's Talmudic Judaics. There's Torah Judaics. There are the Rothschilds practice a Luciferian.
But the thing is that the Jewish people are in a double quandary. They are in a double dilemma because they have been doubly deceived. The Americans who are not Jewish, we've been deceived big time. But Jewish Americans have been deceived doubly because, first of all, they've been deceived by the Zionists. You see, the Jewish people, this gets back to your Rothschild question, the Jewish people were Eastern Europeans, and they lived in the shtetls, they lived in this land in Ukraine, and Belarus, and Ukraine, and Russia, and Eastern Germany, and Poland. That's where they lived. And Zionism was imposed on them by the Rothschilds. In the 1870s and 1880s, there's a very good set of books called the Encyclopedia of Zionism in Israel. It's by Herzl Press. It's printed in Israel. It's English language, 2-volume set. Highly recommended. Hard to find. You might find a library that has it. The 1971 edition is the one you want to read, not the later one, because the 1971 was more honest. But read the articles about the secret societies and the Rothschilds. And they'll tell you how the Rothschilds created these secret societies called B'nai Moshe, the sons of Moses, B'nai Brith, it was also a Rothschild thing, and there's other ones. And these societies were sent into Eastern Europe to cultivate Zionism as a political ideology for these, in these Jewish communities, and the people were told, you don't belong here in Ukraine, you don't belong here in Brest-Litovsk, you have to go to Palestine. Our language is now Hebrew, you have to be Zionist, you have to go there. Because they needed people for their project. And the big Zionist project, the big project for Palestine began with the Suez Canal, because the Rothschilds owned that. And in order to protect that, they thought that they should have this piece of this place in Palestine, but they needed Jews to populate it. So they had to deceive the simple Jews, and they were able to marry political Zionism with Orthodox Judaism And that marriage occurred in Białystok, Poland. And that's when they got a rabbi there, a head rabbi, Białystok, to marry the political ideology of Zionism with Orthodox Judaism, which is the predicament that people like Michael Chertoff are in. They are serving Israel because it is their religious duty to do so. You see? And so for American Jews and French Jews, they are put in the same predicament. Their community, their congregations might be telling them, you should be supporting Israel. Benjamin Netanyahu comes there, Ariel Sharon comes there and tells people in America, American Jews, says, your place is not America, your home is Israel. Hello? My home's Israel? And they tell them that. And so Jews feel torn and feel that, so they're doubly deceived. Now, it's certainly Jews are not responsible for 9/11. I name the people who are responsible for 9/11. It's completely wrong to say that this is a Jewish crime or even a Zionist crime. Well, the Zionist crime part is actually much more accurate. That's more accurate. But there are also innocent Zionists who have just believed that, the Jewish people have a right to this homeland, la 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 la, and they're not part of any criminal enterprise. But there's a subset, a very small subset. And what's happened in Israel over the past 100 years is a form of social Darwinism, where the most ruthless, toughest of the tough prevailed. And sometimes it meant killing your fellow politician, like what happened in this country. We are being brought down the same line because they killed those people like John F. Kennedy who resisted. Same thing in Israel. Same thing in Judaism. Jews who, B'nai B'rith, for example, there was a conflict in the 40s in the B'nai B'rith. And they said, okay, now we have to decide, are we going to be a Zionist organization, a secret Freemasonic organization for Jews, or only for Zionist Jews? And they said, Zionism wins. And Zionism always wins because Zionists have a gun in their pocket. And if you don't agree with them, they'll use it on you. And so in that way, the most ruthless characters have prevailed in Israel. I have a lot about it in this book when I talk about the Lavon affair in Israel in 1952, because that was the time when the terrorists really took over. In 1952, when they bombed American and British targets in Egypt, then the terrorist gang that is circled around Shimon Peres, they prevailed. Shimon Peres is like the godfather, the tutto da capi. He's like the head of the whole thing. Question, sir.
Yeah, the Rothschilds, these are two pivotal events in our history. I've read quite a bit. Amstel Rothschild, the head of the family, seeking control of the nation's currency on Carolina, or law, economy on Carolina makes its law. Right. But weren't they also involved in helping, along with the Rockefeller crowd and others, the DuPonts and others, creating the 1929 crash? Yeah. And didn't they also back up Hitler along with the Dulles brothers as well?
Actually, I think it's Hitler hated the Jews because of the Rothschilds, that the big Jewish financiers pulled the money out from under Germany in World War I. And that's what inspired Hitler, rather hatred.
I understand. But I read that the Rothschilds actually helped, along with some other people. I know just
but helped the Germans in World War II.
Yeah. Well, did that. Is that true? Or?
The Rothschilds' role in this conflict or that conflict, they have been involved in basically every conflict since the American Revolution. Wow. They have been because they have the power over the British government. Again, I was just reading today in this book, I was reading the chapter about who controls our political parties. And the chapter in this book focuses a lot on who controls power in London, in the Prime Minister. And it was Tony Blair, and then it was Gordon Brown. Well, in both cases, just like in this country, there is a person who is behind the Prime Minister you don't see. And he in the case of Tony Blair, his name was Lord Cashpoint. He was Lord Levy. And he was the guy who changed parties from the Liberals, joined the Labour Party, New Labour, and then he gave millions and millions of dollars, and he ran Tony Blair. And the same way that when Gordon Brown took over, another guy, Cohen, took over. And he's married to an Israeli-American girl named from Los Angeles named Harel. But in the case of Britain, for example, it's very clear. In the United States, the same thing. We had Bill Clinton. When Bill Clinton was in office, when he took office in 1993, the guy who was in the Oval Office, running the Oval Office, was my good friend Rahm Emanuel. Rahm Emanuel is the son of a Zionist terrorist from the Stern gang, the Lehi. I spoke to his father. His name is Benjamin Emanuel. Real last name is Auerbach. But in any case, Rahm Emanuel was the guy who pushed NAFTA through in 1993 through Congress. He worked for Clinton, and he was Clinton's main man. He's the guy who got the job done. Then when Clinton came out of office, he went and worked for an investment bank in Chicago, was paid like $20 million a year or something, made a couple of deals, got lots of money, and then he ran Obama. He was chief of staff for Obama. Now wait, who is this Rahm Emanuel? Why is Rahm Emanuel always running the White House? You see, it's like you see President Clinton or you see Tony Blair, and you think that's the leader of the country. Wrong. It's the guy behind him. It's the guy you don't see. And that guy is getting his orders from the Rothschilds.
The architects.
They're the architects.
Emanuel's the manager for the
Or like,
architects.
yeah, like at the Pentagon. We had Rabbi Dov Zakheim, who grew up in London. He was the comptroller of the Pentagon when all this money went missing. Remember, like $2 trillion was reported missing on September 10th? Well, it's the same thing. It's like Dov Zakheim went to City College of London to become a rabbi. And he's more connected to the city of London. And why is he running our Pentagon? Why is he? And so if you wonder who ordered this large amount of nanothermite to be made wherever it was made, well, it might very well have been made for the U.S. Army and just like got pushed over here, pushed over there. With that amount of money, that amount of slush fund missing, you could buy the world. Question?
Yeah. Do you think that the Saudis were involved in any way, particularly Prince Bandar?
They may have been, but most likely only as useful idiots. Because the Saudis are not, they're just not up to anything of that nature. They're used for like financing, for example. They're used to play the role of the Arab terrorist. For example, P-Tech. I was writing about P-Tech in this. P-Tech is a computer company and as enterprise software, plays a big role in the FAA and U.S. government. It was a little so-called Middle Eastern outfit that was running Quincy, Massachusetts. And I called the guy up. He didn't want to talk to me at all, hardly. He was a Lebanese guy. Because he wasn't really the owner of the company. The guy who was running the company was Michael Goff, who worked for the Mossad. So they had this company that they pretended to be an Arab-owned company and financed by some dodgy Saudi financier who gave it that extra veneer of Arabness and terrorism and all that stuff. When the person who was running the company, training, procurement of software, procurement of hardware, marketing, everything, was Michael Goff, the Mossad asset. So this is very common in the 9/11 saga. You find a company like Urban Moving Systems who pretends to be a moving company but it's not. Or you find P-Tech who pretends to be a Muslim-owned company but is not. Or you find Wings, the beach store company in Florida and San Diego that appears to be a bikini and towel shop but it's not. You have Moishe's Moving Company who pretends to be a moving company and wine storage company by the Holland Tunnel but is much more than that. You see, it's like...
Don't you think Saudis and Israelis play good cop and bad cop?
Kind of.
Under the deal, kind of.
It's kind of like that because it's kind of like that because you have to remember that the Saudi money and the Kuwaiti money is in the city of London.
Yes,
it's like the Kuwait holding company. All of this money, you know, they have all this money. They're rich with lots and lots of money. Even the Norwegians have like a sovereignty fund that's like $840 billion. Well, what do the Norwegians and the Kuwaitis and the Saudis, what do they do with that money? They turn it into London. And then when they get involved with this London crowd, they become part of the gang. You see, so then you're part of the gang. Then you kind of like go along to get along. Like the Norwegians. I'm part Norwegian. I used to live in Norway. And it's like the Norwegians were bombing Tripoli with the Danes. Norwegians, it's like, whoa, how did this little Norway going from being a country of 3 million people who cried about being occupied in World War II to being occupiers so quickly? Well, Statoil has a lot to do with it. Because Statoil is the state oil company. A little country with a lot of money has to play with the big boys. And so you have to kind of like go along to get along. That's it. Yes, sir, question.
Yeah, I was wondering if you could elaborate a little more on the people involved in 9/11, like Larry Silverstein, for example.
Yes.
And how they're
Yes.
related to Bibi Netanyahu and so forth.
Yes, good question.
And what I wanted to ask you specifically about was, everybody has heard of Larry Silverstein if they've studied 9/11.
Yeah.
But what a lot of people don't know is that the co-owner was a guy named Frank Lowy.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
And Frank Lowy is also a Zionist.
Yes.
And his son, this is what people really don't know. His son, named Peter, is on the board of the Simon Wiesenthal Institute.
Yes.
And the RAND Corporation.
Yeah.
And the RAND Corporation produced a report which the Simon Wiesenthal Institute, a guy named Mark Weitzman, presented to Congress in front of Jane Harman's committee. And that is where they accused Richard Gage and Architects and Engineers of being a terrorist site.
Yeah.
So Peter was instrumental in getting that hearing, okay?
Yeah.
And accusing Richard Gage of that, and his family profited directly from 9/11.
Oh yeah, of course. Okay, let's. This is a very good question, and I'm going to put some pictures together for the presentation in the Bay Area in the end of February, exactly about this, because as I told you at the beginning of this presentation, Bibi Netanyahu and his father Ben Zion Netanyahu are what they call revisionist Zionists. Ben Zion Netanyahu, formerly born Milakovsky in Warsaw, that's the father of Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister's father. He passed away a couple years ago or a year ago. He was the executive secretary of Vladimir Jabotinsky, who is the father of revisionist Zionism. Revisionist Zionism was the hardcore Zionism that came from Jabotinsky, who came from Odessa, that basically said that we have to use iron power against the Palestinians. And in 1923, he wrote a book called Iron Wall, an essay, saying that between the Palestinians and the Jews in Palestine, there had to be an iron wall. And this iron wall to keep the Palestinians out. And the Zionists, the revisionist Zionists, are extremely hardcore because they call for using force against the Palestinians and using brutal force. And if you remember, since the Likud came to power, every operation usually has the name Iron something. Iron Brain, Iron Fist, Iron Shield, Iron this. They talk about iron a lot. Well, they built that iron wall, didn't they? Under Ariel Sharon in 2003, they started construction. They now have a Berlin Wall, or what you call a Berlin Wall, which is, I think, twice as high as the Berlin Wall and like 10 times longer across the whole Middle East. I mean, the whole Holy Land. And so the places like Bethlehem are encircled by this frightful. The Israelis are good at one thing: creating frightful structures. If you've ever lived in Israel, you've seen that they have like absolutely no aesthetic sense whatsoever. If you go to an Israeli home or a kibbutz home or an Israeli museum and you look at what they call modern art, it just makes you want to puke. There's nothing beautiful about it. When they built this iron wall, I mean, it's kind of hard to make a separation wall look nice, but they make it look hideous. And then they have these vehicles. They make military vehicles, and they look like really something out of a bad dream. That's Israel. That's Israel. Well, so they created this. They created this construct, this idea that they had to use brutal power and retaliation. What they called retaliation. Retaliation is, in fact, terrorism. And this is what the Jabotinsky called for. And Ben Zion Netanyahu became the head of this movement when Jabotinsky died in the 40s. Jabotinsky died before the State of Israel was created. I think he died like in 44. And so then Ben Zion, Netanyahu, became the head of revisionist Zionism. And revisionist Zionism is exactly that. It's extremely brutal, harsh, and Ben Zion was like the ideological founder of this. And so he kind of had a great deal of influence on his young son, Benjamin, who grew up a lot in America. And so Benjamin is kind of like Bibi Netanyahu, somehow got psychopathic. He's become psychopathic. And he sees this as, he was a furniture salesman before, but he sees this as all being about him and everything like that. So he's a very dangerous character. He's a very, very dangerous character. He's taking the world into a very dangerous place. And he wants us to attack Iran. He's been pushing for that. And that's what he'll do when he comes.
Losing it.
What?
I think he's losing it.
Yes, they are losing it.
It's very obvious with this Paris thing.
They are losing it. That's exactly true. And also the whole Zionist construct is losing it. Because you see, the state of Israel is no longer the sweetheart of Americans. Americans and all across the Europe, people are saying, whoa, 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 enough of this already. Maspeak far. It's too much. And that's why I came. Say again?
I think the recent turning of Gaza into total rubble was a watershed kind of jump the shark.
Exactly.
Jump the shark. And they say in Europe, the awareness, we have such Zionist-controlled media here.
Yes.
And we don't see, there's great outrage. And in France, they're worried. I mean, that's, I think, one reason Charlie Hebdo attack was to create some sympathy.
Yes.
To beat back the anti-Zionist sentiment that is Washington.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think you're absolutely right. And that's why I came to Europe, I came to America this past fall. Because I felt like you, that the operation in Gaza was so excessive and it turned people right off. And so, they made it, and it was a very strategically bad move because they did it just before the commemoration of 9/11. So people are going to say, like, well, maybe Bollyn isn't wrong. Maybe Bollyn isn't wrong. I mean, if they can do this, if they can bomb ambulances, and we can see it on YouTube, well, maybe they're as bad as Bollyn says they are. And so I thought, this is the time for me to make this tour. And that's exactly what you say. People are waking up.
You know, if you don't mind, just to flesh out the Zionist control, to answer this gentleman's question. They're the control, they have a stranglehold in 3 areas. In finance, they're ahead of, the Federal Reserves. The Rothschilds are big shareholders, along with other City of London families. In the political arena, AIPAC gives 50%. Remind you, Jews only make up 2% of our population. But AIPAC, called the Jewish Lobby, there's a book called The Jewish Lobby. They make up 50% of all campaign contributions. There was a Congresswoman, Cynthia McKinney. She revealed that all congressmen, all of them, have to sign a document pledging their fealty to Israel. Otherwise, they won't get campaign contributions. In fact, they will not only get funded, if they don't sign it, they'll make sure they get routed out. They'll run someone else against them. So that's our political arena, our financial arena they're controlled, and our media. All 6 companies, I think all of them, I'm pretty sure all of them are CEO'd by Zionists, and the big shareholders of the media companies are Zionists. Right. They have an absolute stranglehold. I think they're going to be victims of their own success. Such a stranglehold.
And it's only the
they
United
push
States
so far. And we're just like...
And it's only the United States that stands up for them, protects them against the rest of the
Well,
United
no, the Zionists control France, Germany, all of Western Europe.
Well, let's hear some other people.
Okay, question? There.
Are you familiar with all the Union plan and the Clean Break?
Say again?
All the Union plan.
Oh yeah, Oded Yinon.
Yes.
Yes, that's. She's asking about the Oded Yinon plan, which is an Israeli strategic planner. In 1982, thanks to Israel Shahak and Arab American graduates, they translated this plan. This is an Israeli strategic plan for the Middle East, and this was then published in a journal in the United States. Israel Shahak was a great Israeli chemist and professor who translated important articles from Hebrew to English so that the non-Hebrew speaking audience could see what's going on in Israel. What the Yinon plan, that's Y-I-N-O-N, last name, first name is Oded, O-D-E-D. Oded Yinon plan from 1982 basically said, that Israel's plan for conquest in the Middle East is to break up all of the Arab states into ethnic statelets. And this is called Balkanization, because this is what they did in Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia used to be one big secular country, socialist country called Yugoslavia. Now it's 6 or 7 mini statelets, like Kosovo and Serbia and Croatia and Montenegro, etc., etc. Montenegro, by the way, is a Rothschild fiefdom. They got most of the assets of, they control Montenegro, which is the most beautiful part of Yugoslavia. And so this plan calls for like taking Lebanon and breaking it into sections. Iraq, apropos, Iraq is going to be broken up into a Sunni section, a Shiite section, and a Kurdish section in the north. And by doing this, the Israelis protect themselves in 2 ways. They make a nation, a neighborhood of ethnic states in which they are only one, in which they are just another one, an ethnic state for the Jews. So therefore, ethnic states, hey, that's cool. We're all ethnic states here, right? And secondly, it makes them the most powerful one in the whole bunch.
That's what they're doing right now.
Yeah, that's what they're doing. That's what they're doing. And so what they do to achieve this goal is they foment sectarian violence. And they, for example, they put off bombs in Kurdish areas and say it's being done by the Sunnis or the Shiites. So they get these communities who were living quite peacefully together under Saddam Hussein. They're like this. And so that way they create the tension that then becomes the division, and they break the country up. I live in a little town in Sweden where a lot of my neighbors are Iraqis, and they're very sad about this because they come from a place when they were Iraqi. Now they're being broke along sectarian lines. So that's the name of the game. That's what they want to do, and that's what they're trying to achieve with false flag terrorism. With false flag terrorism, they're doing it also here. They create also these radical ethnic groups like skinheads or neo-Nazis, like in Ukraine. They created this neo-Nazi group called Svoboda, which is like, Nazi type stuff. And then they get, when they needed this group to do something, these are like young kids who are like all wrapped up in being Ukrainian. They said, go get that nasty Yanukovych. He's a pro-Russian guy. Let's get him out. So then these kids all are being led by an Israeli. An Israeli rabbi was leading this ragtag bunch of kids who were chasing out the police, going after Yanukovych, and the kids were being shot from behind. It's like, whoa, they're saying, what's going on here? They're bad guys over there. We're getting shot from these guys. We're getting shot by our own people. They were. So this sniping action, this violence, is what caused Yanukovych to flee, right? Yanukovych was the elected government of Ukraine. And then, of course, 2 weeks before, Victoria Nuland had said, who will be the next prime minister? 2 weeks before this attack even happened. You see?
Chris.
So, go ahead, question.
Yeah, with this in mind, we've heard that the CIA and Henry Kissinger have both said that Israel will be gone in 20 years.
Yeah.
I have heard recently an idea that since we've got the head of Ukraine is a Zionist, and that one of the religious people there is a Zionist, the idea that the Israeli leadership has accepted the fact that they aren't going to win, and that this is going to end up as a conundrum they can't get out of, that they're going to bail and move to the east.
Or escape hatch, yeah.
Well, yeah, it could be, that there are Zionist states and there are Zionist states. I would say the United States is a very strong Zionist state. Canada is a very strong Zionist state. Australia is a Zionist state. Ukraine is a Zionist state. So if Israel ceased to exist, if Israel were to go down if Israel were to cease to exist like South Africa or Russia, I was in Russia, I was in that area when the Soviet Union ceased to exist. Nobody got killed. 3 border guards died in Lithuania. That was it. And that was so the entire Soviet Union went out of business without a shot being fired.
Aren't the Khazars, though, from Ukraine?
Yeah, the Khazars are originally from the Caspian Sea. They're originally from the steppes, and they were around the Caspian Sea. And when Genghis Khan and the Russians kind of pushed them out, especially the Genghis Khan, they dispersed up the Volga and up into Ukraine. And what is it? And these are the Khazars. These are these converted people. But they do control Ukraine. They do control Ukraine already. But the idea that they're planning contingency plans for the evacuation of the Israelis, what I think is the best thing for Palestine and Israel is that if they would, as an American, this should be normal, one man, one vote. That Palestinians and Israelis live together in one state, and each person gets to vote regardless of their race or religion.
That can't happen because Israel has over 200 nuclear weapons, and and because of Seymour Hersh's book, The Shock Doctrine, we know that they're aimed at places. And how is little Palestine ever going to be on equal parity with
I'm not saying that there should be a Palestinian state and an Israeli state. That will never be fair. I'm saying that it be one state.
I agree.
And I'm saying that the Zionists
Where are the weapons going to go?
The Zionists have to get over their psychopathic idea that they are supreme and that they're supreme over them.
That's what the Arabs wanted from the beginning, is a secular state where everybody has a vote. That's the Arab agenda. That in and of itself disqualifies it from being a Zionist agenda, in and of itself.
Right.
So that'll never happen. They need, well, if you let everybody have a vote, there, they'll vote Israel out of existence. That's why they have to have it densely Jewish, so that won't happen.
But you see, the thing is that the secular Jews are leaving Israel. They're coming to Los Angeles. They're coming to California. They're coming to America. They're tired. They're what? Germany. They're even going to Poland. They're tired of Israel. They get the fatigue factor has gotten so strong. As the country has become more and more radical, more and more Russian, more and more religious, the secular Jews say there's no place for us anymore, and they go to America. They go to Europe. And so, what I'm saying is that there can be revolutionary changes without violence, and I hope and pray that something like that happens. You never know what's going to happen just in this upcoming election in Israel. You know, hope springs eternal. Question, sir.
Yeah, I actually want to go back to the solutions theme. I've got two ideas for that. First, I wanted to say that I think education will fail, teaching people about the problem, as you indicated in your talk. They don't want to hear it. It's just painful. Right. And so my background is as an academic psychologist, and basically there's two kinds of reward. You can either offer somebody something good, an appetitive stimulus, positive reinforcement, or you can turn off something bad, like electric shock, and that's called negative reinforcement, termination of something negative, so minus times a minus equals a positive. And so to that end, it was the Nazi, Hitler's prime minister of his ministry of propaganda, Goebbels or somebody, basically said, you can just scare people, and then everything else goes. So where people are on the spectrum of generosity to greed can be manipulated by how fearful they are. If you make them afraid, then they're kind of afraid and kind of greedy, and if you make them unafraid, they're very generous and stuff. And so notionally then, you said that our budget, the American government's budget for war is now perhaps up as much as $800 billion per year. And so there's that fellow with kind of the country accent who's always saying, let's take our country back, let's take our country back. And I think many Americans would like to do that. And if you were to take, let's say, $500 billion and demand that as a peace dividend, and create the vision of what $500 billion per year could do for America, prosperity would go way up. And so some economists, and I don't have the skills for this, would have to lay out what you could do with $500 billion a year, or maybe 600, and create a world of prosperity. In 1963, I was pissed off in Seattle because I had to pay $225 a year to go to the University of Washington because the state of Washington was cheap, and down here in California you can go to Berkeley or UCLA for free. And so that's the peace dividend that we can do, and we have to, and that could be done we need to create a vision for a national thing of let's capture the peace dividend and do that. Now the trouble is they can have more false flags and scare us out of that, and we have to inoculate people against being scared by false flags again. But on a national basis, I think this vision could do a lot. Now, the second solution could be done on a state or county or city thing, and that's the notion of public banking as espoused by Ellen Brown. And that's another way of taking our money back. And in fact, the state of California could create its own money. And I think Ellen is wrong because she says turn it over to the bankers, which means, in my view, turning it over to the Rothschilds.
Right.
Because the Bank of North Dakota, wherever it is,
Yep.
has been run for some 92 or 93 years, where they've had political contributions to the governor and the Secretary of Treasury and the Secretary of Agriculture there in that state, and they set the board of directors, and so that has been corrupted. But if we were to create a thing where we had a direct democracy, where the people voted for the priorities to spend the money to create prosperity in the state of California, then those states which have a state initiative process could do that. And I would create this money, this special California money, to be used for California projects to create jobs and prosperity for the state of California. And so that's how it could be done in the states where you have the initiative process. So that's the end of my.
No, that's a very good idea. You know, it's the same sort of thing as that what we see in the world and in Europe is that you find the countries that have the least corruption have the highest quality of life, right? I live in Sweden, which has a pretty good standard of living compared to what the stresses people in this country survive under.
We're like 20 or 30.
People in this country are under a great deal of stress, you know. But it's happened that I had to live in Sweden because I couldn't live in my own country anymore because of the police prosecution. But what we find is that, like in Europe, the most democratic country is Switzerland. It's the most democratic, and it's also the most prosperous. Because when you have real democratic government making intelligent decisions, like you said in California or any state, America is the same thing. America is a collection of sovereign states. Now, if a state like California were to enact like what you called for now, which is very much like the Swiss model, where California could create credit for its own businesses and state, then you would turn California back into the golden state it was maybe like in the 50s or 60s, and people would again be voting with their feet and coming to California. Would be a better quality of life, and people would be leaving places like New Jersey or Illinois because it sucks there, because the government doesn't work, the government's corrupt, you know, and people in Chicago, you know, they're just very cynical. They know that it's crooks. When you talk to a Chicagoan, a man, when I was a little kid and I talked to a man who's like 70 years old, they'd say, they're all crooks. They're all crooks. And they know that.
They feel that way in LA too.
Well, in LA it could be like that, but it's like that in New York, it's like that in a lot of big cities. But what I'm saying is that prosperity follows the riddance of corruption. When you can get that corruption out, rooted out, then you will have a higher quality of life, and better government leads to more prosperity. And so we have to take, I think, state by state, states have to take back some of their sovereignty. Like North Dakota, you said, you know, North Dakota has its own state bank, a real state bank. And in doing that, states will prosper, and we will hopefully shame corruption away. We'll get rid of it by shaming it away. Like this is what I say to how Americans should treat these Israeli gangsters. When Netanyahu comes to this country, when Ehud Barak comes to this country, people should protest, shame, 9/11 murder or something like that. Shame them. Because we don't have the power to arrest this man and to torture him like they do in Guantanamo. But the people, like I've said, the people who belong in Guantanamo, chained to the floor and being beaten around the head, are people like Netanyahu and Barak. Because if you want to find out what happened on 9/11, you've got to get the people who did it. And you see, when we expose, this book exposes, I name the names, I show who the people are. If we can prosecute the crimes of 9/11, now that's a tall order, but if we could, then we would expose this, we would unravel this whole web of deceit that has got us like this. And only then can we rebuild something better. Because we're still struggling. We're like, you know, our hands are tied and our legs are chained and our eyes are blinded, and we're trying to get out of it, you know. We're severely handicapped. We're severely handicapped. We are just, you know, we're just trying to see the light at the end of the tunnel. But in order to move forward, we have to put this war on terror out of business. We have to put these criminals who did 9/11. We can't just like, okay, we'll let you go this time. No. These people have to be arrested. Michael Chertoff should not be speaking on C-SPAN. He should be arrested as soon as he steps in the studio. I mean, all of these people had to be arrested. Bush, Cheney, Bush and Cheney were useful idiots more than anything. But the Zionist guys behind them, and those Rothschilds too. And it's not impossible. You know, they want us to think that, oh, the Mossad is all powerful and most efficient killing machine in the world and all this. That's a bunch of hooey. They're people just like you and me. Nobody is all-knowing, all-powerful except God. And these people are just like you and I. And they can be arrested, they can be put out of business. The whole Rothschild empire can be brought down in a year. It just requires people being arrested and prosecuted for crimes.
I guess what I'm saying is, I think that like the game of Monopoly, do not pass go directly to prosperity. I think that the prosperity will get people's attention, and frankly, they don't care about this. And I think this should not be neglected, but it shouldn't be the first assault. The first assault should be the vision of prosperity nationally, and the vision of prosperity at the state level.
Right.
And people will pay attention to that because we're all suffering.
Right.
Real quick, what do you think of the Israeli artists? And then go ahead. The Israeli artists.
Oh, the Israeli art students, you mean?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That's very interesting. The Israeli art students, there was in the years, 1 or 2 years prior to 9/11, there was a gang of Israeli art students going around. I write a lot about them in the Florida Connection, this chapter of this book, because this was...
This was happening concurrently.
And before. It was written like, it was started in 1999, 2000, was being exposed. And what they were doing is they were going primarily to the offices of DEA officials, people in the Drug Enforcement Agency, and trying to sell them art, and trying to get into their offices, and trying to get, information. And I don't know whether they had bugs in the paintings or what, but the thing is that why were they so preoccupied with the DEA? And this is where I think that a very important aspect of the whole 9/11 conundrum it fits is that the drug enterprise bringing cocaine and heroin into this country has been going on a long time. The Israelis have been part of it for a very long time. And there's a saying that no crime binds people more closely together than a crime committed together. And in this crime of this Mossad drug importation to this country, the Bush family and the Clinton family are tied very closely. And see, that's why we keep getting Bushes and Clintons, because they're part of the whole criminal enterprise.
I understand the art students were actually staying in the Twin Towers in the 90s.
Well, they talk about that. They're talking about the Austrian. There were some Austrian artists who were staying there, and they try to get us all excited about this little group of Austrian students who were staying for a short time there. And
there needed to be a workforce that actually wired.
Yeah, but it was not those Austrian art students. It was
the art student thing. The Israeli art students. Maybe I've got that wrong. Seems to be the sort of workforce.
No, yes.
And they were actually staying in the building.
Well, those are the Israeli ones. The Israeli art students. It's true. Many of them were explosives experts. They were explosive experts, and they were. Yeah, I read about it. They were veterans, and they were experts in demolition. And Per Segolovitz was one of them. Now that's different. And there were crews working in the World Trade Center. Like one whole bank of elevators was out of service for like months before, and this was like going on 24/7. The people in this elevator shaft were working all the time. These are the guys that were wiring the building. These are the guys who were putting whatever nanothermite was being applied, whatever the charges.
Who were they?
Well, this is the crew.
Students?
Well, no, they weren't. They were certainly tied to the Israelis because this was an Israeli project. But who were they?
What was the project that was an Israeli project? Fixing the elevator?
No, 9/11. 9/11. So I mean, I'm saying that if 9/11 was an Israeli operation, a Zionist operation, then the people who put the stuff in the buildings were also working with that same project. That stands to reason. Now there was a company called LVI that does pre-demolition work with Controlled Demolition Incorporated. LVI was run by a guy named Burton Freed, and he was exposed in Engineering Magazine in September 2001, September 13th. Engineering Magazine reported that he had done extensive asbestos abatement work in the building in the years prior to 9/11. I called him up. I got right through to Burton Freed. I was surprised that the president of the company answered the phone. And I said, engineering report says you were in there doing this work for 2 years or a year prior to 9/11. Is it true? He says, no, we didn't do it. But another company. So it's like finding out exactly who applied the cutter charges, who applied this, that's important. But we can't be distracted about just because we don't understand exactly who planted the charge here. We have to understand that the crime of 9/11 is an ongoing crime. That crime was done. They blew the buildings to smithereens, they killed 3,000 people. But from that crime, from that seminal event, they have spun this deception. And this is the ongoing crime where we are wrapped up now. We're wrapped up in this spiral, and we have to get out of that spiral. And in order to get out of that death spiral, we have to understand the deception. Okay, next question. You in the back, you right there, you. Ma'am, you.
Real quick, I want to ask
Yeah.
a question. It seems to me that we need to reach a tipping point
Oh.
publicly with so many individuals like yourself, and I don't know who all is out there as a national celebrity type, or scientist, or doctors, or celebrity, people we know,
Yeah.
to do a giant press conference at the press club
Yeah.
where the American people see, oh my God.
Yeah.
In other words, this isn't just a little
Right.
here, a little here,
Right.
a little there, a book of cards. It's like all of a sudden,
Right.
500 people at the press club, and you know every single face.
Right.
How can we organize all these individuals like yourself, like, I hate to say Charlie Sheen, but
Yep.
you know who I'm talking about.
Right.
I mean, we could all in this room make a list of 100 people right now who are national people who are speaking the truth about 9/11 because
Right.
they're all little lone voices off like this. We need to reach a tipping point, which is only 15% of the adult population of our country,
Yeah.
to like make this go a different direction.
Yeah, that's
How
right.
can we reach that tipping point?
Well, that's a very good point. That's why I have tried to get people that have a lot of stature.
Yes.
I tried to reach out to the Pope. I tried to reach out to people that have a lot of presence, a lot of stature. I'd like to send the books to the Pink Floyd guys because I know that they're pretty active. But you need to get people like that. But you see, and it's unfortunately the case that people who are in the entertainment industry, like in Hollywood and stuff, they are too much. They're serving the Zionist. They're serving the Zionist lords.
They're scared.
They're scared. They won't do it because the guys that run Hollywood are Zionists.
It's a blacklist.
Like Arnon Milchan. Arnon Milchan is Mr. Mossad in Hollywood. He's a partner with Murdoch.
He won that Academy Award last year. I just about died.
He got an Academy Award last year?
Yes.
Arnon Milchan?
Yes. What was the movie that won Best Picture, you guys? He was one of the producers of the movie, and I was dying that he was going to go up there, and he did.
Yeah.
You know, he made a movie about a plane.
Like Argo, maybe.
Yeah. Whichever one with Ben Affleck.
Yeah,
Argo.
Argo.
He was a producer of that movie, and he got an Academy Award.
He made a movie in 1978 about a plane being flown into a high-rise building. Richard Burton was the person that had telekinesis and imagined the plane, and the plane flew into the building. And so that was his first time he made it. And you see, that's when the Mossad started planning this whole thing. So they got Arnon Milchan, who's a big Mossad agent, to make a movie about it. It's a French British production. So it's called the Medusa Touch.
Oh yeah.
And so they set up these whole big props or whatever to make the film, and they got this big plane flying into the building. And then in the year 2000, he made another movie called The Lone Gunman. The Lone Gunman was made with Murdoch, New Regency Productions, I think it was.
Right.
And it was made in Vancouver. It aired March 2001 about the 747 or 757 flying right into the World Trade Center.
See?
So it's like they've been creating this ideation. It's called ideation. They've been creating the idea, setting the stage, getting this into the popular psyche that it's possible that Arabs could steal. But in the case of the Lone Gunman, the plane was remotely hijacked, very much like reality.
Yeah.
Right, we have people like Noam Chomsky and others who people supposedly respect in the U.S. who will touch 9/11. There's so many.
Amy Goodman.
Exactly.
Goodman watched World Trade Center 7 fall in real time. She
Yeah.
watched it fall.
Yeah.
And yet she won't zip.
No, she's the daughter of a rabbi, just like Noam Chomsky is the son of a rabbi. They won't.
Noam Chomsky is actively speaking against 9/11.
Exactly. Exactly.
So I mean,
People take
how do we
money
educate
from
these
these
people?
Amy Goodman is supported by the Rockefeller Center, and she's a gatekeeper, and she's only going to say so much. I was at the Heartthrob when we had 40,000 people in the street. That's where I met this man. We're at his home this evening. when we were opposed to the illegal invasion and the occupation of Iraq. I was at the Hearthrug working with all of them. I don't join anything, but I'm out there, and I could see, oh my God, it was in your face. It was like you could see what was coming, and I saw it little by little, and now George Soros funds how many of these organizations, and we've lost our movement.
Well, it's the same thing. She's asking though. She's asking how do we get this movement going again? Like there was a good opportunity, for example, when they had this Occupy movement, but the Occupy movement did not articulate any demands. They didn't even call for 9/11 truth. They didn't even call for ending the war. So it's like, how do we do this? We have to organize, I think, first and foremost on a community level, on a local level, and then we can, like in California, you have the best 9/11 truth movements in the country. You have the Northern California Alliance up there in the Oakland Bay Area, and then you have down in San Diego. What you need here is in Los Angeles, you need something like that. And I think that what you'll see that when you get people that are like-minded, and when you can escape the grips of the people who are trying to control you and keep you from talking about this, you can make progress. But the thing is that you will find that I was for the longest time one hand clapping with my analysis that 9/11 was a Zionist operation. And it wasn't accepted. It's not accepted in the 9/11 truth community even today.
Yeah.
Because it's naming names and it's putting the pieces together, and they don't want you to go there.
It's almost like they're agent provocateurs in some of these groups where we just
of course.
can't get anywhere. We can't
Of course.
get anything done because they just disrupt. They
Of course.
argue.
We are like today's peace movement. I mean, the 9/11 truth movement is like this. It is the peace movement. It's like the 9/11 truth ends the war, and they don't want to end the war. They have so much money. There is so much money at stake. There's so much power at stake. When we're talking about this conquest of these Middle Eastern lands, this is not just for Israel. This is to control the world.
Right.
And this is where the Rothschilds fit in. This is a master plan. This is much bigger than Mr. Netanyahu or Mr. Barak. This is a plan to occupy Tehran and Iran and to occupy Russia, to get Russia back into their clutches. They want Russia back in the clutches. That's why they want Khodorkovsky to be the next president of Russia. They want to vilify Mr. Putin to the point where they can just like kill him, and people say, "Good riddance, Mr. Putin. Here's Mr. Khodorkovsky." And then the Zionists would control Russia again. When the Zionists control Russia, and if they control Iran, if they get Iran again, they have the world again. You know, so this is a big plan, and people like us are just little voices. But when we can organize and when we can grow our movement, you know, we have a long way to go because the deck is stacked against us. But events like this are a good start. Question?
How did the Israelis get 19 Saudi Islamic Brotherhood members to go and perpetrate this?
Okay, this is a very good question. Yeah, that's a very good question. That was a very good question. The thing is that you have to understand that the Israelis run operations in all the Arab countries, and they have these people that they can control, and they control radical groups like ISIS, Al Qaeda, Hamas. These were all like Israeli created or Israeli run.
Oh, come on, you're saying that Hamas was running...
Hamas was created by the Israelis. Israeli intelligence created Hamas in order to split the Palestinians from the secular and the religious groups. Hamas was originally an Israeli start. And see, so they create Abu Nidal. Even in 1972, the attack in Munich, that was also false flag.
Well, Abu Nidal...
How is that a false flag?
Let's not get it. I can't. I just say that if you look at the 1972, look at the details of the 1972 attack, you'll see that strange guy with the glasses and funny hat, he was a Nazareth, a boy from Nazareth who was Jewish Arab or something like that, and he was the guy that they spoke to. He was the head of the whole Munich operation. Yeah. Now, but what your question? Getting back to your question is that how do they do this? So they get these people, these patsies involved. In Israel, half the population speaks Arabic. I mean, that might be an exaggeration, but there's a lot of Israelis who come from places like Morocco and Yemen and Iraq who speak fluent Arabic. Then these guys are used they go back into Yemen or into Iraq, and they create connections. They run operations there. But what's interesting about the 19 Arabs you're talking about is that something like 6 of them, no fewer than 6 of them, had duplicate licenses. And this is where it's very important to read a book or watch a movie called Little Drummer Girl, which was written by Mossad agents with John le Carré. And John le Carré wrote this in 1982. But he talks about how a false trail is left. And they do this by like leaving behind clues. And those clues are meant to be picked up and discovered. So in the case of these 6 guys in Florida, these terrorists who were in 9/11, at the same time that Muhammad Atta is going around, somebody else is going around with Muhammad Atta's duplicate license, who looks like Muhammad Atta, and is, for example, going to a strip club and drinking vodka and doing all that kind of thing in Muhammad Atta's name.
Or making a scene at the time.
They making a scene, being remembered, because these are the Mossad guys. So that these 6 Arab patsies don't know it, but somebody else is out there doing things in their name, leaving behind very visible trails, so that these trails are picked up immediately after 9/11 and say, yeah, Atta was here, and this guy was here, and this guy was here. And this guy left his license in the car. And this guy left his manual how to hijack planes in the car. Just like the guy in Paris, he left his driver's license or he left his ID in the car. How convenient. Yet these guys in Paris were supposedly jihad guys who were avenging the name of the Prophet, yet they covered their faces. It makes no sense.
Didn't they find a passport?
Yeah, ID card. He left his ID card in the car. In the World Trade Center they found.
They found a partially burned ID card in the rubble below the World Trade Center. It somehow got out of his wallet, out of his pocket, through the fuselage of the plane, across the planes, out the opening in the building, and down to the street, and it survived.
Right.
Well, I believe that.
Question, sir. Question.
Yeah, is any of this related to Zabrinsky's World Chessboard? I'm just curious.
Oh, yeah. Zbigniew Brzezinski's World Chessboard. Yes, it is. It's more connected. It's connected to that, but it's also connected to the Samuel Huntington's thesis, Clash Civilizations. That's what they want to do. Is that in order for them to get their way, they need to have constant warfare. They need to have constant warfare. They need to have constant struggle. So in order to do that, they have to create, after 1991, when the Soviet Union went down, they had to create a new enemy. They created, the new enemy was going to be Islam, fundamental Islam. And so in order to do that, they had to switch our way of thinking from being anti-Russian and anti-Soviet to being anti-Muslim.
1984.
So they set up this clash of civilizations.
1984.
They set up the clash of civilizations, which is what we are now in. And this clash of civilizations was sent out to all of academia in America, and academics, they swallowed it. They swallowed it. Like when I started a little group in Santa Cruz called Palestine Support Group in the fall of 1990 because I saw the war coming. And I was finishing my degree in Middle Eastern history, and my professor came back from a year sabbatical at Cambridge, where he had been under the tutorship of Bernard Lewis. Bernard Lewis is the British Jew who teaches all of the deans of Middle Eastern studies in this country. So when Edmund Burke came back to Santa Cruz in September, he spoke at the Federal Building in downtown Santa Cruz. Now, mind you, this is just when we're starting to get heated up about Kuwait and Iraq in this war, right? The first words out of his mouth were balkanization. This is in 1990. And the first book he wants me to read is the book, The Bridge of the River Drina, about Yugoslavia. It's like, what have you been studying at Cambridge? You see, Bernard Lewis had been teaching him about the balkanization, and this was the game plan for the next decade. And he just was honest enough to talk about it, which is exactly what followed 5 years later, the dismemberment of Yugoslavia, what you were talking about, that this is the game plan for the whole Middle East. But I found, I called Professor Burke, he's retired now, I said, Professor Burke, can you explain to me why the first words out of your mouth at the Federal Building in 1990 were about balkanization? He didn't want to talk about it. Because he knew, in Santa Cruz, I'm kind of like, I was a bad boy. I was very critical of Zionism, and for that reason I've been painted as like a Nazi and anti-Semite and all this stuff. Question there, please.
You said the policeman after you?
Well, yeah, okay. I was a journalist in Washington, D.C. for years, and when we discovered the nanothermite, when the thermite was discovered, I was part of that with working with Professor Jones, and I was talking about it a lot, and that was in the spring of 2006. And I came out to Davis, California, and I met with the professor who had measured the smoke that came from the burning rubble. And that's very important because the smoke that burned from the rubble was heavily laden with nanoparticles, very, very small particles, which are only created by fires that are hotter than the boiling point of the metal. That meant that beneath the World Trade Center, deep down under that pile of rubble, for 3 months, there were fires that were hotter than the boiling point of iron, or whatever, molybdenum or whatever. This is extreme. This is a chemical reaction going on. They're spraying water on it day and night, and yet the pile is like a griddle. It's hot because down beneath, it's molten. It's cooking boiling iron. And so then I said, well, this is clearly evidence of something like thermite, nanothermite, slag material going up, and then Professor Jones and I were in very dangerous waters because he had made a discovery that wasn't supposed to be made. And this was like the final nail in the coffin of the official version. And so I was attacked by undercover police at my house in August of 2016. 3 undercover police came to my house and they, in front of my wife and daughter, they tasered me. First they knocked me on the ground, then they sat on me. One guy was kneeling on my temple and my head. A 210-pound man was kneeling on my temple. My wife said my eyes were bulging out, my face was purple. She wanted to take a picture, and the police said, if you take a picture, we'll arrest you too. And then in that position, another guy was sitting on my back. My shirt had come up, and he put this, I felt this square object on my back. He had put the stun gun right on my back, above my kidney, and zapped me with a full dose of the drive stun. It's called the drive stun. Then I got up, and when I got up, there were 7 police cars in front of my house. They had all been waiting around the corner. And they all, as soon as the Homeland Security guy did his job, then they all came because, police have to let federal actions go first. And the Michael Barber, who ran the 3-man squad, works with Homeland Security. He's also an agent for Homeland Security. So obviously Chertoff, or somebody like Chertoff, got on the phone and said, well, Bollyn is back. We know Bollyn's back in home, so you go around, check him out, make a provocation, bust him, criminalize him, which is what they did. So when they finally got me up, my arm was sore and I was in handcuffs and all this, and these cops all over my yard. And my little son came back, my daughter's there, and I said, why are you arresting me? I had called 911, I had called 911 because this car with armed men was going around my house for day after day. And finally I said, this is really weird. I have to find out what's going on here. And when they came up my driveway, my wife had stopped them, my daughter was there, and I just came out of the house. I said, these are the guys that I called the police on, and they're here. And I said, who are you? What agency are you with? And I said, why are you threatening our neighborhood with this car and all this gear? And the guy said, the 3 men standing in front of me, the guy said, oh, we're threatening your neighborhood, are we? And he reached for something back here, and I said, whoa, I had to get my brother. I turned to go to the house, they tackled me. When I stood up, I said, what are you arresting me for? And they didn't tell me. They just took me away and abused me, terrible abuse. And this is the town, little town, Hoffman Estates, where my family was one of the pioneering families. But, I was then criminalized. And then in Chicago, like probably here in Los Angeles, they give you 2 options. One option, they say, you have 2 charges, cop to one, and we'll take away the other. But you have to cop to one. You have to plead guilty. And I said, well, I'm not going to plead guilty. I didn't resist arrest, nor did I assault anybody. For me to assume guilt, for me to plead guilt, is to give you the power to deem me some sentence of crime for nothing I've done. So I fought it. I went to trial, 4-day trial, and it was a hung jury, but I was in a trial in which the judge was a Zionist Jew, the prosecutor was a Zionist Jew, and the clerk was a Zionist Jew.
What was the charge?
The 2 charges, two misdemeanor charges. One is called resisting arrest. The other one is called assaulting a police. And the police. So this is written about in great detail. What I found out in this book, it's in the related articles. There's like 10 articles I wrote about this. Because what I did is I saw my lawyers weren't going to do diddly for me. I realized that they weren't going to do anything. And they allowed the police to destroy the evidence. The police, for example, had 7 video cameras on the attack, on the whole thing. That was all recycled, all thrown away. So it was just meant to criminalize me and to marginalize me so that I would become, go to jail. And they wanted me to go to Cook County Jail. The prosecutors were literally like jumping up and down at the conclusion of the trial that I should go straight out the side door to Cook County Jail, where they probably would have found me suicided. I would probably have been suicided. And the judge, the Zionist judge, credit to his name, he gave me that 2-week, 3-week period, which is basically, before sentencing, which is basically your time to flee. You have to flee. And it was a very tough thing for my family because we had to leave our little home. My children, it was really tough. But we had to leave, so we escaped like Jews from Nazi Germany. We went to Detroit, to Windsor, to Canada. Then we went to Toronto, then back to Calgary. I wanted to get out before the no-fly list went into effect in that country. So I wouldn't be on that. I didn't know. You're having to escape for your life, really. And we went to Norway. I had some reader in Norway said, come here, you can stay in my house. I go sailing in the summer, take care of the house and everything. So we stayed in Norway, and we went to Sweden then, and then we went to Estonia because my wife had been so wrapped up in this, her blood pressure was over the top of her head. And she just went to the doctor for some procedure, and they said, we can't even touch you. Your blood pressure is so high. So we then went, we thought, well, we'll go to Estonia. We found the same thing in Estonia. We were chased out of Estonia too, because when you're involved in telling the truth, you make pretty big enemies. And Estonia is one of those new Eastern European countries that is in the NATO fold, that goes along with this whole anti-Russian thing, which is a bunch of nonsense, because it's going to bring Europe to war. And the last thing Europe needs is a war with Russia. So then we've been living in Sweden for the last few years. But to understand...
How'd you come back to this?
Yeah.
I flew on an airplane. I came on Norwegian.
Well, okay.
And the thing is that because the thing is...
What was customs like for you?
Customs, no problem. I'll come through Oakland. It's just a little slow, and I think it's outrageous that they have any right to ask me any questions about why I'm in the country. But the thing is that my offenses legally are misdemeanors. And so the only place that I cannot go and give a presentation like this is Chicago or Illinois. And so on this tour I'm going through Texas and Kansas City and Seattle, Los Angeles. And,
Wouldn't you avoid all of Illinois though?
Yes, of course. Of course. They wanted, I'm going to go to St. Louis, and a friend in Illinois said, come and stay in this little town just on the other side of the river. And I said, no, I can't go there. It's like that song in the 60s, Indiana wants me. Lord, I can't go back there. Well, for me, it's Illinois. But it's okay. Illinois, I have no great love for Illinois.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Question.
How much hostility are you finding from people who are saying you're anti-Semitic?
None.
Oh, good.
None. And it's like there have been and probably will be threats, and people will call and send emails and say, like when I came to California in September, the Anti-Defamation League of B'nai B'rith put out a memo, a bulletin, that the conspiratorial anti-Semite Christopher Bollyn is coming to California, la 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 la. And I try to take action against such slander, but it would be kind of hard in this country. But in Sweden, I've been called anti-Semite, and I try to take action because I tell the people who, if anybody calls me that, in print, I say, please, you must know some place where I have said or written something anti-Semitic, that that a rational person can conclude that I'm anti-Semitic. I said, please show me that, because of course I've never done that, because I'm not anti-Semitic. I've lived in Israel. I speak Hebrew. I was married to an Israeli girl. My criticism of Israel is only because it is unethical what they're doing and wrong and evil. And my whole beef with 9/11 is because it's an atrocity in my country that destroyed this country, is destroying this country, and it's destroying the world. And if we don't stand up against it, well, we deserve what we get. We have to fight this. We have to fight the lie. And it's not my fault that the people who did 9/11 have so many connections to Israel and the Likud party. It's not my problem. It's not my fault. It's their fault. It's their problem. But there's been, in this country, it's been a history that it's a greater crime to reveal a Zionist crime than the crime itself. Huh? So that when you expose Zionist criminality or Zionist crime like this, You're seen as the bad guy. They're not bad. You're the bad guy. Question?
And I just have to make 2 points. It's like Mark Twain said, it's easier to fool the people than to convince them that they've been fooled. That's pretty good. But also, I have to say, and maybe we shouldn't mention this, Judy Wood, but I believe that there is so much validity in, and I don't even want to talk about her, I think she's wonderful, but it's not her. She doesn't theorize. We're talking about physical evidence. And you mentioned earlier the little rubble that went down 3 or 5 streets. I mean, I know you must be.
I have her book. I just got it. I got it in San Diego.
It's bigger than all this.
Yeah.
It's bigger than just Israel or any countries. I think it has to do with Tesla, with energy technology that they do not want out.
It could very well be
misled in every nuance, every.
It could very well be. And people in San Diego lent me a copy of that book that I'm going to look at because I'm going to look. Her video presentations have not been compelling. And what I have said to Judy Wood, and to people like Jim Fetzer all along, is if they believe that nuclear bombs were involved, or if they believe that I know. I'm talking about Jim Fetzer. Jim Fetzer.
Fetzer is not Judy Wood.
I know. Or Judy Wood. If Judy Wood has evidence of some directed energy beam, whatever. What I'm saying is that it's incumbent on a scientist to produce a peer-reviewed paper with their evidence. You have to bring the evidence to the scientific community so that the scientific community can say something. That's what Professor Jones did. And that's what I encourage people like Judy Wood and Jim Fetzer to do, because they certainly know, they come from the scientific community, they know that.
Jones was working 10 years earlier on the
cold fusion.
And he, I mean, there's just so much to this, this direction.
I understand. Judy Wood's point that this is a secret military weapon, the one that's capable of polarizing.
Well, the thing is, the thing about Judy Wood's talk about, I have to read her book, I have to look at her book, but I know that she's talked about that there's this directed energy beam weapon. Now, the reason, there's a history there, because when I went to Germany in November after Thanksgiving 2001, I felt that I should go to Europe because I felt that it was unsafe. I thought it was prudent to go to Europe because I was explaining how 9/11 was based on a pack of lies, while this country was going to war based on that pack of lies. And I thought, how wise is it for me to stay in this little house in Huffman Estates and be writing, I was a journalist for a newspaper then, and to be pointing at these lies when they're going to war. I said, they might arrest me, they might attack me, and I was right, it was not safe. So I went to Germany, and one of the first people I met in Germany was a former Stasi agent, an East German intelligence agent named Hannelore Mark, who admitted that she was also working for the Mossad. And what she wanted to tell me about was a directed energy beam weapon that she said had been tested in her apartment in Weimar, and that the Soviets had perfected this energy beam weapon, that they had 2 beams fired from 2 different places into her kitchen, and she was told to put like a ceramic bowl in front of the oven in her apartment and then leave the apartment. And she came back a couple hours later, and that ceramic bowl had been reduced to very fine dust. This is what she told me.
Did she use the word scalar?
I don't know if she used that. She
used
the word, I remember she used the word like plasma and stuff, but she was also a physicist. And I thought, well, this is a little bit, so I wrote an article about it, but I didn't put it in this book because it turns out that it was probably actually disinformation, meant to give a explanation for the pulverization of the World Trade Center that could be used as a red herring.
What other explanation is there, though?
Well, the thing is that the nanothermite. The nanothermite was found in the dust.
And conventional explosives.
And conventional explosives. Big conventional explosives.
And also nano conventional explosives. Nano RDX is something that's being talked about.
Yeah, the thing is that...
The thermite cuts the beams, but it does not cause the pulverization.
No. See, the thing is
and neither does falling.
No.
So you need another thing. It could be nuclear explosions, it could be scalar weapons. You cannot explain dust.
But the thing is that...
people vaporize?
Well, let's get to that. The thing is that as the South Tower, remember the South Tower was the first tower that fell. The South Tower, the east corner of the South Tower, was where the plane went out, that building. The plane, whatever, there were some very high velocity objects went flying out that corner. And at that 81st level of the South Tower, about 10 minutes before the South Tower fell, a cascade of molten iron began falling. And this cascade was like a waterfall falling from 400 meters up from the 81st floor. And it's when you read the government files, the government report about the World Trade Center, they will tell you exactly at this minute and this second there was a puff of white smoke, and then 2 seconds later the increased flow of this molten iron. Now this is molten iron falling from the 81st floor, and tons of it, tons of it. I mean, this is, you know, because 1 cubic meter of molten aluminum weighs something like 7 tons, metric tons. It's
molten iron?
Molten iron, molten iron. And this is what was falling from that building. The windows were 2 feet wide, and it was just pouring out, and falling to the street. And it was white hot. What produced that?
Yeah.
What produced that? Now, you have to remember that molten iron was at least 1,200 degrees Celsius in temperature, which meant that for the poor people who were trapped above that floor, they were literally being cooked. Because 1,200 degrees is extremely hot. That means that the people above it were also, the heat was going up through the elevator shafts, which is why all those poor people broke the windows and held out of the building, leaned out of the building, and then eventually jumped. Because the heat inside was so oppressive. They said, either I die being cooked alive in this building, or I jump to my death. So they jumped to their death. Hundreds of them.
Steel melts at 2,800 degrees.
Right.
Nanothermite goes to 46 to 48.
Right, now that's the thing. So what he's talking about, so the thing is that what produced that amount of molten iron? The official report will say that's aluminum. That's complete rubbish. It's not aluminum. Aluminum in such conditions would appear to be like the color of tinfoil. So that's iron. Well, I found out that the bank, that floor where that stuff was coming from was a computer center for the bank of Fuji Bank. And one of the guys who worked there called me one day, or I talked to him, and he said that in the summer prior to 9/11, they had been bringing in these big battery banks. They were called batteries. They thought they were batteries, backup batteries. They had reinforced the floor, and they brought in these huge battery boxes. He said they were brought in at night, they were very heavy, and they were black. But he said the strange thing was, they were never turned on. Well, because they weren't batteries in the first place. They were boxes of thermite, or thermate. And so when each plane struck the tower, if you look at those pictures, when next time you go online, you look at the pictures of the impact of the South Tower, impact of the North Tower. Go to my website. I brought that out very clearly. You see huge bursts of white smoke. That's aluminum oxide. When thermite reacts, it's aluminum and iron oxide. Then what happens is that there's a reaction, huge amount of energy is produced, heat, and you get white smoke, which is aluminum oxide, and you get molten iron. That's where molten iron came from those battery packs that were never turned on. Of course they weren't batteries. If you're gonna bring a giant battery and you're gonna set up a battery backup system for your computer system, you're gonna start powering it up right away. You're not gonna let it sit there for months. Okay? Next question. You, sir.
Right there on that particular floor, if you look at pictures of the World Trade Center, you'll see these 2 bands at different heights in the building. There's one band that's about 2 floors thick near the bottom, and then there's one near about on the top third. And those bands are areas where the World Trade Center is reinforced structurally with a big truss, extra trusses. Okay?
Those are the lobbies.
And that is where the thermite originates from, because those areas of the building are much tougher than the other floors. So they would have had to use extra thermite and extra materials to weaken those particular floors.
I just want to say you were asking about the pulverization of the floor. This material that was found, the nanothermite that was found by Professor Jones in the dust of the World Trade Center, it looked like paint. Originally they thought it was paint. They thought it was like a primer, because it was like orangish, reddish on one side, which is the iron, and the other side was silver. And this because it was a very elaborate nano composite of thermite. And what that means is that particles that are so small they're 1/10 of a micron in diameter or smaller. That's extremely, extremely small. It's almost molecular.
Was it proven to be military grade?
Well, yeah, the military made that kind of stuff, but I have found documents from the military and from Lubbock, Texas, from Texas Tech down there, where they talk about the energy that these things can produce. You can just tweak them. You can tweak these composites any way you want. Add barium, you can add stuff, you can subtract stuff, but you can add things. Hollywood uses them. Hollywood uses thermite for effects. But you can add things that make it more powerful and that bring up the energy yield immensely, so that the amount of energy that these materials can produce is just mind-boggling. But what I'm saying is that it's basically like a paint. So it could be applied, just sprayed on. For example, if we're inside the World Trade Center, we're like getting into the nitty-gritty of the building, and you decide, well, we want to pull this building, we want to pull this column. But you spray some of that stuff, spray it here, spray. Oh, it's waterproofing, or it's fire, it's rust prevention, whatever. The guys that are putting it up there might not even know what they're doing. They're just spraying. They're being told that this is a rust proofing, or this is something. And then somebody comes in later and puts a little detonator cap there and one there, and so that stuff is there, and it can be wired so that even it has wires in it, so that carry the current, so that the whole thing goes at the same time. This is, but you see, they know that the average American person in 2001 knew diddly about nanotechnology or about nanothermetics, but the government knows. And they did the government did, the United States Geological Survey did a survey of the dust, where they put some papers together. But nobody found that stuff until Professor Jones found it. Because we had evidence of thermite in the destruction of the building, we wanted to find where was it. And when he found that in the dust, when he found those little chips, and you take that little chip, that little piece of paint chip, and you heat it to 420 degrees Celsius, which is not terribly hot, it goes off with a bang. And it releases more energy per gram than any known explosive. Well, this kind of stuff could certainly have played a role in the pulverization of the floors.
Well, and even more on the thermite, because the government itself found literally billions of tiny little iron balls in the dust.
Yes.
Little tiny iron spheres.
Yes.
They could have only been created by the vaporization of steel. Like you'd use a spritzer.
Well, wait. Now, those tiny balls of iron he's talking about, these are the iron spheroids that were found. And the U.S. Geological Survey of the dust found these. And the U.S. government could not explain, nobody could explain why these little tiny balls of iron were found in the dust. This is a signature characteristic of the World Trade Center dust. All the dust in the World Trade Center has these tiny little balls, like BBs, except smaller than BBs. Now, where did that come from? That means that when the World Trade Center fell down, there was a great deal of molten iron accompanying that event. And that is obviously the result of thermite. Thermite results in white smoke and molten iron. So we have a lot of molten iron, we have a lot of white smoke. Where there's smoke is fire. We got to take one or two more questions, then if anybody wants to get a copy of this book, I have a few left. I'm going to go to Texas, and I would really like to sell most of these books because I have to carry them, and it's very hard for me to carry these books. So this book is $20. I asked $20 for this one. The original articles, of which I have 5, I asked $25 for this, and Jeff Gates' book, Guilt by Association, is $20.
How's the first two different?
Okay, I'll explain again. This is the thesis presented in a very concise format, easy to read. This thesis in this book is based on 11 years of research, and the articles are here. Each article here is in chronological order, from 2001, September 2001, through to 2012. Because I was a journalist, and my articles were supposed to be about 1,200 words. So these articles here are about 1,000 words or 1,200 words long. And these are the chapters, this is the book. So this is where you start, but if you're a serious scholar and you want to understand how I came to this conclusion, you have to read these articles. And these books have something like 60 5-star reviews on Amazon right now. So they're considered very significant contribution to the 9/11 understanding 9/11. One more two questions. This question is sir.
Talking about efforts to reinvigorate 9/11 truth.
Yeah.
There were 2 pretty compelling movies, and I wonder if you can draw any lesson from what happened to each of these 2 movies. One of them was loose change. We
Yeah.
in 4 cuts seemed to go from something very compelling to
Yeah.
something that
Yeah.
it was blah.
Okay, I can answer that. Go on. And then the
And
next
then
one.
the second one was the 9/11 Mysteries Demolitions,
Okay.
where the woman got sued to hell and financially.
That's Sophie
ruined.
Small.
Yeah.
Okay, I can speak to the first movie because Dylan Avery came to me for information in Washington when he started making his movie, and he was working by himself, and then after about a year or half a year, then along came another guy, Jason Berman, who's a Jewish guy, who then started taking executive control of the project, and then my material was taken out of the movie, and from the first movie I was in there a lot. Then to the 4th edition or so, I'm not there at all.
Yeah.
So it's control. Okay. Did you want to ask something? What?
No, I want to get those.
Both of them?
Yeah, how many do you have?
I have. Yeah. Okay.
Could you offer a closing comment? I've got about 5
Yeah.
minutes
Let's.
left on the video.
One second. Your question here.
I just wanted to know if you are familiar with the Schofield Bible and the introduction of
Yeah.
Zionism into the United States into the Christian community.
Yeah.
Where the
Can you
Christians.
please
Yeah.
answer the second question?
The second question, but the Sophie's movie, that movie I don't know enough about. I don't know enough about Sophia's movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not as familiar with that movie, so I can't say.
You didn't see it?
What's it called?
9/11 Mysteries, Demolitions.
And what happened?
Well, she was thrown a
What- what's that?
$5 million lawsuit
Yeah.
for infringement of copyright for some
Yeah.
of the stuff she used, and she's like just financially crippled now.
Right.
She
Well,
actually
that's-
had to pay?
No, but she hasn't got money to pay. But
Right.
there's a judgment against her.
Right.
She's earned, you gotta move forward.
Yeah.
Right. Well, so she was stifled. She was stifled. She was put out of business, which is what they do. Like I used to work for a newspaper called American Free Press, called The Spotlight. First it was called The Spotlight, then it was American Free Press. After I was ousted from that paper, the paper was actually involved in my predicament. The editor, when I was in Davis, California, when I made that discovery about the nanothermite and all that, the editor told me your travel allowance has now been reduced to 0. From $1,000 a month to 0, which meant that I could no longer be on the road, which meant I had to go home, which is where the police were waiting for me, right? And then I found out later from L.T. Patterson, editor of Criminal Politics in Cincinnati, he had been sued for $10.5 million by Mark Lane. Mark Lane is the lawyer for American Free Press. And he told me that in 1994, he learned in this process that Mark Lane, the Jewish lawyer,
Not
actually
JFK,
owns Mark Lane, the guy who wrote about Beyond Judgment and the Kennedy murder and whatnot. Mark Lane, he was also the lawyer for Jonestown. Mark Lane was the lawyer who precipitated the murder at Jonestown. He pressed all of Jim Jones' fear buttons and led Jim Jones to call for that white midnight, whatever they called it.
Yeah.
Okay, then Mark Lane then went to American Free Press and ran Liberty Lobby. In 1994, with the $5 million that Willis Carto had paid him, he took over the whole kit and caboodle. And he runs it. So it's like, he was trying to sue this little newspaper in America called Criminal Politics that dealt with the same subject that American Free Press dealt with. Same thing with the Sophia. They want to shut you down. They come up with a big lawsuit against you. They want to stifle you. They don't want independent voices like that to be heard. Now, I may have seen Sophia's movie. I don't recall it. It's been a long time. But definitely, I know about the Dylan Avery situation because I watched it very closely. Question there.
Can I ask you one more quick question about
Yes.
presidential politics?
One more.
Big
Oh,
election
2 more.
next
Come on.
year.
Let's come on. Go on. Okay. No, you one quick one.
Yeah, we have this big election next year. What about somebody running who's going to tell the truth about 9/11?
Uh-huh.
Never happened.
Yeah, that's.
Never happened.
Because they're kill them.
Yeah.
They kill them.
Yeah.
See, this is what we're up against.
Right. Well, it's like in Canada they're even trying to just get the Green Party. They're just trying to get the Green Party to address 9/11 truth, and they're finding that there's too much at a political level, even in Canada or in the United States, even at a local level. Talking about using 9/11 truth as a plank is like touching the third rail.
Yes.
It's a question here. Somebody, you got a question here? Yes.
I was asking about the Schofield Bible.
Oh, the Schofield Bible. Yeah, the Schofield Bible is, I know very little about it, but this is the whole idea how they kind of hijacked Christianity and gave us this interpretation. The Schofield Bible is about rapture and all that, isn't that? No.
No, the Schofield Bible came out of Oxford.
Yeah.
And the early Zionists decided that they needed to have a group here that would support them, and it would be
Right.
the Christians.
The late 1800s.
Yeah, and so
Right.
what they had to do was they had to put Israel,
Right.
or the city of David, the kingdom of David, had to be in Israel.
Right.
And before that, that was not a part of the Bible.
Right. Right.
That's what it has to do
Right.
with.
Yeah, that's the.
In fact, there's an archaeologist at Hebrew University, and he follows whatever the government wants, and he tries to find evidence
Right.
to fit the theme.
Right.
But there's two archaeologists at Tel Aviv University who really tell the truth and say there's absolutely no
Right.
evidence
Right.
that there was a city of David or a country.
Right. So the Schofield Bible has been used to create Christian Zionism.
Yes, it places
Yeah.
Israel back at the center.
Yeah, like Preacher Hagee and people like all these guys, these television evangelists. And this is they wanted to corral Christianity. They wanted to get the Christians to support the Zionist project, and they've been very successful in that. And that has been very detrimental. That's another thing I write about these fundamental hoaxes that have been imposed on the American people. One is, of course, that Israel and America are sister democracies, and we have like interests. But the other one is that they have tricked the Christians into believing, and non-Christians into believing that the people of Israel today, the Israelis, are descendants of, and so they use biblical archaeological review, BAR. They use the religion, and every way they can. Like Netanyahu said. Netanyahu was basically doing what they did in the Bible when he said, put the lambskin on the arm, and he said, feel, Father, give me the birthright. He's taking the birthright that doesn't belong to him using fraud. Right. Was it Esau and Jacob who did that? And the father touched the lamb. The father couldn't see, and he felt, and he says, you're the hairy one. Yes, I give the birthright to you. It's an old story.
Before we go, I would
Yes.
like to say something to the psychologist.
No psychologist.
Was it you? Okay. I really think that you are right, and I think you're onto a very important theme, and it's a way to demand that our money is funneled back from these thugs and back into our culture and
Amen.
Americans. And I think that that's a thing that you can talk to Americans about. Because you can talk to all of us about the things we've been talking about, but when you go out, I can't even talk to my sister about it.
Right.
I mean, they think I'm wacko.
Right.
You know, but you can talk to them about what's happening to their tax dollar.
Right.
They know something's wrong.
Yeah.
That's a way to take the money.
It's like Mike Chicky's bumper sticker on the back of his car. He says, "How's the war economy working for you?"
That's right. That's right. Yes.
Okay, so now anybody who would like to get a copy of the book, come on up. You want a copy? Okay. Well, thank you.
Let me get one of your longer ones here.
Okay.